Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on the Doing Virtue podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Christ. I'm here with Mark LaRochelle and Brian Hicks, both of my co-hosts. And we have a guest tonight, Larissa Fedoryka. We are very excited to talk to her and have a drink. Larissa, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Tonight we are drinking Larceny whiskey. And the reason that I picked this was twofold. Firstly, it was on sale for $34, and normally it's closer to $50. So that's the main reason. The other reason is we're talking about music tonight, and you know, as everyone says, music is the key to the soul, or something like that. And
now they will say it.
and now people will say it. And on the label of this bottle is indeed a keyhole. It's a small batch wheated bourbon mash bill, 92 proof, Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. It's pretty solid. I was thinking of saving this because I actually introduced Father Pollard to this whiskey, and he really liked it. And I don't know if he's picky about it, but he just specifically liked it. And I think he brought it to his brother's house for Christmas. So I was going to save it for then, but he has been dodging my calls and not coming on. So you know what? Take that, Father. We're going to drink it without you. So without further ado, we will get pouring. Would you like some?
That was a good pop.
I'll take a
That was a good pop.
That was an excellent
Let's go.
pop.
We should start rating the pops.
fresh pop.
I think that was the first pop that I've heard.
All right, Brian.
Sorry.
You're not going to be the judge.
Well,
of pops.
no. Now we can start actually
can
doing
start.
it.
I'm gonna
Do you have the tasting notes on
pray
this?
to- It's tasty. No, I do not. If one of you wants to look it up and read that off, we can. I can read the back while you're doing that.
Yep.
So this is a John Fitzgerald. And on the back it says, John Fitzgerald's weakness was a fine bourbon. He was a treasury agent who at times was the only person legally allowed to carry keys to the rick houses, and he gave into the temptation often, taking the best barrels. Wow, quite the confession. And he would take those that contained wheated bourbon, which is bourbon made with wheat instead of the traditional rye. These eventually became known around the distillery as the Fitzgerald barrels. Now Larceny Bourbon honors both the superb taste of this lawless treasury agent and the legacy of the old Fitzgerald brand in this small batch.
So the color is, obviously you can see, but for those who can't see, which is all of our listeners, it's a bright new copper, according to Larceny.
I see that.
Can you?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm colorblind, so
Oh.
I can't.
Well.
I mean,
I get behind the copper.
the aroma is fresh bread and toffee with a note of butterscotch. And the taste is buttery caramel and honeyed notes with a rich mouthfeel.
Yeah, you
And
can
the
smell
finish
it.
should be long, gently sweet and savory. It should be.
Definitely buttery and caramelly.
Yeah, it's a little bit too harsh to be an Irish whiskey. But if I didn't know that it was a bourbon, I might think that it's a really good Irish whiskey. Because it has a very sweet, fairly sweet, really smooth finish
I see that.
that a lot of bourbons don't have.
I like how it coats your whole mouth, like your whole tongue on the sides, kind of like an umbrella, and then like a waterfall that just shoots down the middle of your tongue with a nice little kick.
We should have her on every
Yes,
single
I know.
now.
So I have a really
whiskey.
specific contract in mind. No, so the first couple times we did this, I was like, let's look up the tasting notes and do what people say about the mouth and the finish and all the different parts. And while I think it would be good to develop that, we didn't always agree with them, and that's probably just the discrepancies between different people's tasting notes. But then several of our guests that we've had on have given these really, fairly to what you just said, very descriptive, even if just kind of off the cuff.
Right.
This is what I think. We were like, that was amazing. We're gonna keep that. I think McInerney had the best
Oh my
one,
gosh.
but I don't even know if his was true. I think
No, it wasn't at all.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and just say he says that with everything he tastes. I don't know if that's true. He said it was simple but precocious, and we were like, wow. But I was like, wait, you could apply that to everything.
If you have
This
enough
wine.
of anything, you can apply.
Yeah, because I don't really say precocious unless I have 4 drinks. So
The website says that the featured recipe for Larceny for a mixed drink is a Kentucky Mule. Apparently, it's an unbeatable combination.
really,
Dude,
I can see that. Because a lot of times
The after show will have Kentucky Mules.
the bar's right there. So, yeah, I think I would agree with that. It's almost not strong enough to use in an old fashioned. I still probably would, but a lot of times you want it to be like really strong, and that way after you add the bitters and the sweetness and all of that, it's still a strong drink.
Right.
But I feel like this would go pretty well with that, because otherwise, if it was any weaker, you wouldn't really be able to taste it. So, yeah, I think that's good. I already cheers with Larissa, but we can all cheers.
Yeah.
This is Doing Virtue.
A Catholic podcast.
Where virtue is what we do.
Cheers.
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 Thanks,
So
Brian.
tonight, as I said earlier, we have Larissa Fedoryka with us, and we pitched the idea of her coming on the podcast by telling her that she should start her own podcast, and then after a longer conversation, she decided she would come on our podcast, and I
You
think she's
realized
probably
that I
going to steal all
couldn't.
of our ideas and then start her own successful podcast. So, that's fine.
Probably not by stealing any of our ideas.
Well, sorry, let me rephrase that. By seeing what we're doing and not doing that thing. It's like when Michael tells Dwight to not be an idiot, right? So, Larissa, I wanted to have you on because I've obviously known you for a long time in different capacities, but I thought that you would be a fantastic person to have on to talk about music. And we don't have to get into that right away, and I'm going to ask a little bit about your background before we do get into that. But I guess for those of you who don't know you, or if they do know you and they don't really know that much about your background, would you give us just a quick couple-minute summary of where you grew up, how you got into music, and maybe like your college education, and then we can kind of go from there.
Oh my gosh.
You went to college, right? I didn't totally
College
embarrass you.
Yes, well, that's a podcast in itself right there. So
All right, perfect.
Let's see if I can get it off.
Episode 1.
Yeah. You'll understand why in a second. Okay, yes. So I am one of 10. I'm number 9 of 10. And definitely, you know how they say that, like, there's a cycle to births where you have, like, the oldest, middle, and youngest. Well, I fall, being number 9, I'm definitely, like, fall in the youngest personality category. I'm still trying to get my life together. So, gosh, let's see where. Well, I was born in Dallas, but we moved here to Front Royal when I was 5, so I was here to 5 to 15. Then for high school, we moved to Austria, and my dad taught at Franciscan University in Gaming for 4 years. And after our first year there, my dad's like, "Well, me and my younger sister Melanie, he's like, you guys want to learn how to speak German?" We're like, "Sure, Dad," and he sent us to the Austrian high school. So we really got a taste of Austria by being part of the culture in a deeper way. My parents are also background Ukrainian, so I think that growing up in a Ukrainian family with a lot of Ukrainian culture, and then going to Austria, and really formative years, 15 through 19, and my dad was really big and just like putting us on trains and sending us places, just like go explore Europe. That played just a huge part in formation of just love of beauty. Let's see, after that, okay, yeah, so went to Christendom for a year, but I wanted to study nursing or medicine, and it just didn't work out to go do the nursing program Franciscan. So I went to Christendom for a year. Then my dad got a job at St. Mary's of Ave Maria College, so I transferred there for a year, missed my friends at Christendom, came back to Christendom for a year, realized that I would have to write a paper for a thesis, so transferred out to Franciscan and did 2 years there and graduated with a degree in biology. And then my last semester at Franciscan, one of my childhood friends, who's a cellist herself, she's like, "Larissa, what are you thinking? You've been playing cello since you're 3. This is a part of your life. You should go study music." So applied to DePaul University, got on the wait list, didn't make it in. So after I graduated from Franciscan, I went to Boston, not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. And then at one point I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to go look into nursing programs. And I called my parents up. I was like, yeah, so I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do nursing. And there's silence on the other line. I was like, what's wrong? They're like, it was both my mom and my dad on the phone. My mom's like, "Are you sure you don't want to do music?" I was like, "What? What on earth are you talking about? Like, you want to support me for the rest of my life? Like, what are you even talking about?" So, so that was my journey to a second undergraduate in music. So I did a year at Boston Conservatory. Realized I was, gosh, I don't even know if I was a minnow in a huge ocean, and it wasn't the right fit. So I transferred out, went to Ohio University, did another 4 years there, and got a second undergraduate in music. And that experience was a tough experience, but after that, let's just say I was like, I'm not doing music anymore. This is baloney. But I have to go west. I don't know why. I just have to go west. And I packed up my car and I decided to go to California. And once I decided, I called my friend. I'm like, I'm going to California. She says, great. I am leaving my job. You can take my job teaching inner city kids orchestra. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. I need a place to live. And I told my aunt I'm moving out to California. She's like, great, you can stay with me. So all these doors were opening up for me in California, and moved to Los Angeles. Worked with inner city kids for 2 years, and in the second year, just realized I need to. It's really hard for me to be playing music when there's no reason for it. So I was like, I'm just going to apply for a master's degree somewhere, and that'll get me practicing because I got to audition. And I said, I'm only going to audition in the schools that were in the places where I want to live. So I'll apply to Boston Conservatory again and Cincinnati. And this man I was studying with at the time, he said, Larissa, Santa Barbara's looking for a cellist in residency. Would you be interested in playing for them? And at this time, I had a really hard time saying no to anybody. And my whole body screamed no because I hated Los Angeles. I hated being in California. It was really a dog-eat-dog world. I wanted no more of it. And so with like my heart just screaming no, my mouth said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And, but I made a pact with God. I said, God, I'm not going anywhere I don't get a full ride. Which is dangerous. So, and maybe this is a little bit embarrassing, but I had to take my GSAT to get into grad school. And I really did not want to go to UC Santa Barbara. So I did not study at all for it. And, yeah, totally. I mean, I don't know if you guys are aware of what the tests are like now, but I guess I never took any, my SATs or anything, so I don't even know what they're really like. But their math was such that if you answered a question correctly, they gave you another question that was more difficult. But if you answered it incorrectly, they gave you a question that was easier. So you could kind of tell how you were doing from the questions, how hard they were. Yeah. Here I am. I'm kind of just like, I don't know, it's like Johnny leaves at 3 and, arrives at 6 with Susie leaving at, it was one of those kind of, I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, this is why I have iPhones. I don't need to do this anymore. So, but each one, I was like, gosh, this question's harder than the last one. Gosh, I must be doing really well. I finally get to the end. And the last question was, what is 100% of 100? And I sat there and I pulled out my pencil and I'm moving the decimal. And I was like, oh my gosh, wait, what? And so so that was extremely telling. I just did terrible. And at the same time, I was like, I don't care because I don't want to go to UC Santa Barbara. I go to the audition and I hear the director saying, I don't know, oh, she has her degree in biology. And she's just kind of this is great, blah, 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 blah. And then I get my GSATs back and I'm in the 7th percentile. Something terrible. And he calls me up and he goes, well, yeah, your GSATs were a little bit less than we had hoped, but we're willing to give you a full ride and a stipend if you want to, $14,000 if you want to come and be part of the quartet in residency. I was like, oh my gosh.
You're like, okay. No, I didn't say anything about a stipend,
yeah,
only full ride.
I know, exactly. My sign not to come. So yeah, again, I just, it was one of those things of, as a musician, your work, your working hours are post school and evenings and weekends. So every day I was just kind of like free till 3 o'clock. At this point, I might as well be taking classes somewhere, having my, it all paid for, and I could still teach in the afternoon, like still continue living it's not going to disrupt my life at all. So I said yes to that. And, 2 years after my year and a half, they were like, well, we'll be willing to give you a doctorate if you want to stay on to get your doctorate, like a, doctorate in 5 years kind of program. I was like, sure. Okay, that's fine. I don't mind. So, so I ended up staying there another 5 years and getting my doctorate finally, which.
So I should have called you Dr. Fedoryka.
Yes.
I apologize.
Yes, it's okay. We're in Front Royal. Let's go down Front Royal.
We don't really recognize doctorates here.
Exactly. We're all equal in the eyes of the Lord. Yeah, and it was interesting because. I don't know, when I, living out in California, and it was hard. I didn't have any Catholic friends. The art world is just not, I really didn't have any Catholic friends for the 8 years that I was in California. Not until the end that I started meeting some TAC people. Yeah, so people were just like, oh, Larissa, you should come back, and you're getting older, and, what about, finding a husband, and you should come back to Front Royal, and da-da-da-da. And I was just like, are you kidding me? Like, Front Royal's where single people go to die. I'm not going to Front Royal. And also it's hard because it's not culturally, there's a lot lacking. We're close to DC, but it's 2 hours. Even now I just kind of think like, oh, to go to listen to the symphony, and you're on a high, and then getting in your car for 2 hours and driving home and getting in at 1 o'clock. I'm like, this is so painful. So, so it was one of these, for me, it was always a struggle because it was one of these things of, I feel like I have two sides of me. One, the spiritual life, which is just so like, everything for me is about God, and I'm constantly thinking about him all the time and how it pertains to art and music and the world around us. And then I have this artistic side of me, and the secular world fills one, and then the spiritual world fills another. So Front Royal has just been so amazing in the spiritual realm, but I just feel like there's a whole side of me, and in particular is classical music, because I think that you can find a lot of other musicians and artists, around here, but classical music moves my soul in a way that no other music does, and I experience beauty in a very intense way through classical music. So, but yeah, God has me here, and it's one of those things. It's like, well, if you don't want to drive out there, then you create your own opportunities, and that's what I've been trying to do here. It's just providing more opportunities, and realizing too that, interestingly enough, the Catholic Church has been this like the preserver of culture for centuries, and it's such a huge part of the Catholic faith. And noticing how, at least like classical culture, and Front Royal is such just like a haven of Catholic people, and education is really huge, and we're like really big into philosophy and literature and everything else, and yet we have this one aspect, the classical, I guess the artistic side, that isn't fostered here as much, and so I think people are craving for it. It seems like people are really hungry for that, and I'm like, it's just the one thing that we need to get into Front Royal, just to really begin to round out our faith in a way. So I don't know. Yeah, I guess that's a nutshell,
Okay.
Kind of a long nutshell, but
Something that you mentioned just briefly, but I think this would be a good place to start talking about classical music specifically, is that you said you started playing the cello when you were 3. Mm-hmm. Was that something, and I know a bunch of people, I think everyone in your family, at least at one time, played an instrument, and I actually, just to prep for this, I just typed your name in, and I was like, I'll just see what comes up, and one of the first things that comes up, which I've actually read this article before, but I think it's a Washington Post article about you and a bunch of your siblings, probably 6 others, playing at the Kennedy Center. And then I think another one was the Wolf Trap International Children's Festival or something. And it was so funny because most of the article was talking about like your parents and like the way that they raised their children and second president of Christendom and kind of, a lot of backstory, and it didn't actually talk about the event itself that much. But yeah, it mentioned that, and I was just curious for anyone listening and for anyone listening who'd be curious, why did your parents start the music education so young, and how did that really kind of change the trajectory of a lot of your lives in that way?
So my mom was a classical pianist. She went to Juilliard, and she was on the track of being a concert pianist. And at one point, she just kind of saw the secular pitfalls of that world, and already apparent in the 60s. And, and in her mind, she kept on hearing, what does it profit a man if he gain the world and lose his soul? And so she ended up walking away from that and then marrying my dad and having, 10 kids. So it was a combination of my mom, which was steeped intensely in classical music, and then my dad, who was a philosopher and just understood the importance of beauty and music. And so the combination of the two, so music was always a part of her life. I mean, she was constantly singing and playing music, and I think at some point the older siblings, she had started giving them instruments, but then she was introduced to the Suzuki method. And Suzuki's principles or thoughts on teaching is that music is a language, and you can start teaching a child an instrument the same age that they would start speaking. And it's a great time to do it. And so then everybody after Damien, who was baby number 5, was given an instrument in their hands at 3. And it is really, I mean, I think my first my first awakening, like my consciousness of like, oh, I'm alive and I'm a human being was, I mean, it's kind of a sad one, but I mean, I have no trauma with my cello. But I was sitting at the cello crying because my teacher was trying to get me to play with a straight bow, and I just remember like weeping, and I couldn't do it, and it was so hard, and so it really was like every single moment of our life, somebody was either playing or my mom had music going on, and I think that what it did for me, and this is kind of also as I'm always thinking about this, and now the house concert series that I do, is realizing that when you're exposed to beautiful music, and my parents, we were not allowed to listen to anything other than classical music, and not only that, but even within that realm, my mom was super picky of who we were allowed to listen to, because she said, whatever you listen to, you mimic. So it's only the really talented musicians, talented in the sense of just having a really beautiful tone,
and being able to develop an ear for that, right? Yeah, it's basically like, I mean, you're creating the taste buds of like somebody who later on can taste the difference of which is why you should only give your baby whiskey when they're little,
exactly,
and nothing else,
and many different
and good
types.
whiskey,
So now, and I keep on saying this, I'm going to end up doing this, figuring out which philosopher said this, but they were basically saying that music is basically like the soil that you plant education in, and when you have a rich soil, whatever else you end up teaching, philosophy and mathematics and astrology and literature and like all those other classics, that will take root and it'll be able actually to blossom. And so that is my experience, I think, of just being so immersed in classical music that it created the ability, I think, for all of us to be able to recognize beauty and just absorb it constantly around us. And yeah, so that was kind of both my parents was a big thing. It was religion, English, math, and music. We were homeschooled, but those are the 4 things that you had to do. And it was like, she was really strict about it. We all had to practice, 2 hours a day before we could go play with our friends.
Right.
But when you're homeschooled, there's time for that. So,
Am I misunderstanding Suzuki? I feel like I remember. So I know the part of like as soon as a child is able to talk, they should be capable of starting to learn how to play and pick up an ear for it. But is something that's like kind of central to that as well is being able to listen to music and then duplicate it and not reading music as much. And I almost felt like that was separate because I did. I played organ for like a year or two with the Suzuki method, and I remember like learning how to read music was a different part of class because like the main part of class was like, okay, we're gonna play this, and you'd listen to it and then you would duplicate it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just like, oh, this will be good for you. It's like a challenge. But later on, I think I remember listening to something about Suzuki, and it seemed to me that part of the method was being able to listen to music and then duplicate it without reading. And then if you wanted to learn how to read music, that was like almost a separate thing. Is that the case?
Yeah, and I think that was probably more the case back in the day, but I think it was a misunderstanding of what Suzuki actually meant because, well, first of all, we're dealing with Japanese kids. So I feel like kind of a different story than American kids. But the way Suzuki, so what he had said is he said that, a child picks up the instrument at 3, and by the time they get to sights, the specific piece, I can't remember what book it's in the violin, that's when you start introducing note reading to them. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that in America, kids would start at 3, and by the time they got to sights, they were like 9 or 10 years old. And then at that point, the parents weren't really getting, or the teachers weren't able really to get to it. And it's also really hard when you have a half an hour amount of time to teach music. You're just kind of like, you rely on the air after a while, and the kids' ears are so strong that they stop kind of reading. That was my problem. I really didn't read music until I was like in my mid-20s. The thing is that in Japan, kids who were in sights usually were about 6 years old, which is the normal time. Because he says you introduce reading of music the same age that you introduce reading of characters or books. Or, and that's the first grade, kindergarten, first grade, you start introducing the letters. And
that's like kind of prime time for being able to remember and kind of develop both ways of reading at the same time.
And learning how to read without it being a difficult thing. Because by the time you get to 9 and 10, you're just like, forget that, I'm just going to use my ear. In the same way, whereas if you try to teach a kid how to read, by the time they're 9 or 10, they're just pretty resistant to it. So, they are, that's very, I mean, he's like a language, a child repeats what they're told. So if you're played something, then you learn how to play it as well, back to them. And then, but that's something that I make sure that my kids, because that was a handicap for me, I've really pushed note reading for my kids. And, but also I think it's incredibly important. Memorization is just, is huge, especially if you start learning it at a young age, because you get to the point where you're playing pieces that are over 20 minutes long and it's memorized. And if that's not trained at a young age, it's like, oh, you're going to be struggling later.
Did some of your, I feel like I remember someone telling me, and maybe it was one of your siblings, did some of them go to Japan to study?
Yeah. 3 of them did. Maria went for 3 months. Sophia went for, was it 2 years? I think she studied with Dr. Suzuki, and Alexander went for 3 or 6 months, something like that.
Okay.
So they 3 of them got to study with him.
Okay.
Yeah, which was amazing.
And was there, maybe there's no way to judge this, but did you or other like members of the family recognize that they were like a lot better in certain areas because they were able to study with him, and like, he had more of a perfected method, and they were also doing, I would assume, like a more intensive study while they were there, and not just like, it's one of my many subjects. It was kind of like, you're here for music.
Yeah,
that's
for like
the
6 hours a day. That's what you're doing. I think I was too young to really be able to tell. Sophia was there the longest, and I kind of feel like remembering like, oh my gosh, yeah, her tone sounds really great. But for me, it was more like, I want to go to Japan. Why don't you send me? I think so. I remember vaguely, but again, like I was probably, I don't know, like 7 or 8 when they left. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Was it always the cello that you played, or did you get a choice?
Yeah.
Did you were just given the cello and they're like, play it?
No, given the cello, I think when I was born, the doctor looked at my hands. He's like, "Oh, she's got big hands." And I was like, hey, "She's gonna play the cello."
You're like, darn hands.
Yeah, I know. But it's one of those things that it was given at such a young age that it didn't even. I mean, I always wanted to kind of play the violin or the piano, but it either suited my personality or my personality suited it. I don't know. I kind of feel like when you spend a lot of hours with a mellow instrument, although I have been told that I'm high strung, that thank goodness I play the cello.
It balances you out.
Yeah, exactly. It's just neat. Like when you walk onto a stage of an orchestra and nobody has an instrument, you're just like, oh my gosh, this is so. You're definitely viola, or you're like, you're clarinet for sure, or flute. You can just kind of tell. Trumpet, trombone players. It's so funny. They're all really tall with really long arms and super skinny, like super skinny. So I don't know. You just kind of have the personality type, or
you kind of. Yeah, I guess, and that does sort of make sense. Like, I could see how there's certain body types that you could kind of play a bunch of different instruments, but if you're someone with really long arms, that's going to be, help you be better suited for maybe the piano because you can like stretch longer, or like the trumpet or trombone or something. So that is funny that you could almost see a group of people and they all play music and try to like pick out what they play. Just
and personality wise too. Just like it's really interesting. So that's kind of been my journey with it. And it's interesting. I think out of everyone, so the three of us, Daniel, Alexander, and I, do it professionally. But and I've done it like when I was in LA, getting to tour around with different artists, and it's fun. But it's just like after a while, it's like how much cotton candy can you eat? And you just want. And the neat thing is, and this is another thing that's like really struck me about the power of classical music, is that the people that you encounter in the classical world, and most of them are probably atheist, but there's a depth to them that you don't experience in other people that are that don't have classical music in their lives. And I have some really, really great friends who, not at all the same walk of life, and but they just have this sensitivity of soul, that you're like, oh, if you just had God, that would be like this incredible combination.
And I think, I don't know if I've experienced it to the same degree that you have, but I think that I would probably say the same thing for people who are involved in like drama, but specifically if they're really into musicals. So they can memorize parts, and they have to actually understand how to act, because it's not just singing. It's not one song. It's multiple different songs and multiple different emotions. And then you've got several different shows. So you're going from happy to sad or sad to happy, twice in a day, or there's kind of this wide range of emotions. But I would say from some of the people that I've met that have even just like local performances, the people that do that, now granted, most of them probably are Catholic because they're here, but I think I would say the same thing. Like there's a certain depth because they have to be able to get into the character, understand the story, and then convey an emotion. And even if they're faking it really well, they're still kind of experiencing it. And I think that might kind of lead into the next part that I want to talk about, which is I think a lot of musicians would say that either playing music or singing is the highest form of art. And I was curious what you thought about that, because I think that there might be a tendency for people who like someone who is an artist to say, well, painting is the highest form of art, or someone who is a dancer is ballet is the highest form of art. And so you'd kind of say that the thing that you do is the highest form. But obviously, now maybe I guess that could be true to a certain degree, but it seems like music might be the crescendo of all of that. Because I would say that like a musical or at least a performance that has music with a live orchestra is going to be better than a play that just has dialogue, or you at least see it as harder to pull off. Even if you don't enjoy it more, you see it as a more difficult task to do well, which leads me to think that if music is part of that, it seems that like music or some branch of it would be the highest form of art. What are your thoughts on? Because you said that you thought classical music was like even higher. So I'm just curious what you think about that.
I should have brought my little book to quote it, but Well, just really quickly going back to what you were saying about a play having music versus a play that doesn't have music. I would even say a play that has live music is different than a play that has the recorded music, that you can feel the difference. And so, so there is something about music live music, that because we can already we feel it in the room, and people move differently than when everybody, you don't, it's like one of these things, like I don't know what it is, it's just like you can tell it's this recording, and it doesn't breathe, like it's very exact, but there's no like this humanness to it, so which to me already says like there's something about music that we can't touch and we can't explain, so that's why it becomes very difficult, I think. But yeah, I think it is because it is capable of touching you at the core of your being more than any other, because there are no words and there are no visuals to get in the way. And so when I look at a painting, I'm looking at a tree and I have this idea of tree, and it gets stuck at this idea of a tree. Or I'm trying to think of what other kind of art. I'm just thinking of like visual art for right now. But music has a way of entering in, and it's not like you don't have this concept and idea. It enters in a place that's so deep. I do actually a whole thing. I did a talk on the healing power of music once. And so basically, and maybe this kind of answers the question, but my whole idea behind the healing power of music is that classical music forces you to stay in the present moment with it, because say with pop music, it's kind of goes around with 1, 4, 5, 1. It's like whatever, it goes over and over and over again. You're caught kind of in a hamster wheel. Whereas classical music is linear and it keeps on moving, and you have to move with it in order to be able to follow what's going on. You can't just like space off because it keeps on moving like a train. So you're at every moment, you're following along with it. And this ability to follow along with the music makes you be in time. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but when you're totally focusing on music, everything seems to stop around you. You're just kind of lost. And so when you're in time, this is where God is present. And this is where God can speak to you. And when you are putting your attention on something else outside of you, you are drawn outside of yourself. You almost like feel, you lose a sense of yourself, and that puts you in a receptive mode. And so when you are in this receptive mode, you are able to encounter God in a level that is like you're feeling love. You're like, I don't know, I can't describe it in words, I can't describe it. And that's why I think it's so deep, because you can't really describe the experience. And I think that visual art, it can, like you can, but it kind of hits you in places that you a little bit more on the periphery. And I think that's why also one has to be really, really careful the kind of music you listen to, because bad music can do the same thing, where you're opening yourself up, and it's disordered music is coming in and touching you at the core of your being as well, having an effect on you. And the same thing, your soil, you're beginning to poison your soil, which begins to choke the seed, basically. And you're less likely to be able to encounter beauty later on. And I think that's the thing that I'm noticing with my friends who are pagan, quote unquote. I really feel that when they die, Christ is going to come to them, and they're going to hear music, and they're going to say, I don't know who you are, but I recognize the sound, and I know that this sound has brought me joy and comfort in my life, and yes, I choose you. And because in beauty, that is where we encounter God.
I guess I would push back, not because I actually disagree, but just to play devil's advocate. If someone was talking about, because really what you're saying is music is like a taste of the beatific vision. But I think that at least when I've heard the beatific vision described, you're just caught up in a fuller knowledge of God, where like your soul is being satisfied, but it's almost like primarily intellectual. So maybe there's music involved in that, but it doesn't seem clear. Or heaven is described as just a wedding feast, and you're like, oh yeah, I've been to a wedding, those are fun. And so you can picture just people are having drinks, people are having a good time. Maybe there's music in the background, but music isn't the primary focus. And the only thing that I can think of that's music related is when some hymns and probably some of the church fathers talk about like the choirs of angels singing, and but it doesn't really go much more into that. So well, I'm just curious what you would think about that pushback.
Well, I mean, I think that music was always a huge part of the Old Testament. I think we probably just like the singing and praising and the Psalms and all of this was just like a natural way of, you know, like David dancing before the ark. Like there had to have been music to that. I think it's just this naturally like, oh my gosh, I just want to burst forth into song when you like, and that's why these musicals that you see where he's like, I'm in love, and he starts singing, you know, like that feeling of you're just so moved that you burst into song. So I think that very often that's like just on that level of the descriptions that we have in those instances of like, I think that feeling your heart full very often results in song. And so I feel like there's a deep, it's not, like I wouldn't be surprised if all of heaven is always constantly a song, and at the wedding feast it is just like music. And so that's like on one side, that's just kind of my experience of it. But also we have John, and that's, I wish I had the quote. John Henry Newman has this incredible quote talking about notes being ordered in such, basically he's saying that music is a glimpse of heaven, and that we've stolen that from heaven, and it's ordered like, you know, being set in a certain tone, and that it's a reflection basically of what we have in heaven. It's like super crude explanation of what he was saying, but that, and then Hildegard von Bingen and her experience. A lot of the hymns that she wrote were, she said that she heard angels singing and she just wrote them down. Or I don't know which saint this is. Daniel would know because he's like the man of all saints. But he said that there was a man who was, I don't know, he was like hunchback, poor, kind of stupid, blah 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 blah, like didn't fit in anywhere. The priest said, you can be a porter for us, some monastery somewhere. And he said that he would look up into the heavens in the stars, and from that, I think it's, he heard from the stars, he heard the Salve Regina. And the Greeks believed that the planets and the stars were the distance of intervals, and that they actually created music. So like we have so many ideas of this, like song is something that's celestial, and it's from the outside of us. And I don't know.
I guess, were you going to say something?
I was just going to ask about, you were talking about music being, making, or I guess music is the good soil, or making good soil. And then you were talking about the beatific vision, and then it just strikes me as almost, so is I guess, would you say that music allows people to pray better? Like, not as in like you're praying within the music, or like if you have a really good soil of music, then obviously it takes the will, so you have to be choosing the prayer, but it almost seems as if it would make it easier for one to be able to, I guess, go in silence to prayer or
commune with God. So I think it's Aristotle that was talking about, he said that if all you did to a young person as they were growing up were expose them to the right modes, the correct modes, that he would grow up knowing right from wrong. You would never have to teach him about the virtues, but he would know intrinsically from the music. So that's why I feel like, and they say how important is the two things you need is gymnastics and music. Because if you have all gymnastics, you turn into a brute. But if you have all music, then you turn into like just this really like a Sally, basically. Like you need to have a combination of the two, and that's why, yeah, I think that that having the correct kind of music disposes you to virtues, and in that way you just have. And this is another thing that I've just been thinking about because I've been reading Carol Houselander on the Passion of the Infant Christ. She talks about, every cell has this image of the pattern of God in it and everything. And I kind of was thinking further along the line, just because cells have this vibration. And that, and I don't know if this is true or not, but like God as a being, I would imagine that he has a certain type of vibration to him. He just like pulses. And that we are made in his image and likeness. So he's the big tuning fork, we're the little tuning forks, and when we're brought close to the big tuning fork, we begin to resonate with him. And the further we get away from the big tuning fork, the more we just like get stale. And that music is all vibrations. And so when you're listening to the right type of music, you're actually, like the fork is vibrating along the same frequencies as the eternal. And that also, if you're listening to metal music or hard rock music, whatever, it just like deadens that completely. And so like kind of using the same image as the soil, like I kind of use just the tuning fork of the more you expose yourself to beautiful music, the more you resonate on God's frequency, and actually the more you begin to recognize beauty in everything else. And that's why I think like visual arts can touch you very deeply. I don't think naturally. I think you have to know a little bit more how to experience art. You have to understand it a little bit more. Like you don't have to explain a sunset to many people, and you actually don't really have to explain music that much. Like people can just be moved.
Yeah.
Whereas with the painting, there's a little bit that goes into it.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that what you just said kind of opens the can of like modern art or different types of things that certain people consider to be beautiful, but other people don't. And so then you're like, okay, is beauty just in the eye of the beholder, or is there an objective standard to beauty? Is beauty just picturing something in reality? But to me, what's fascinating is that it seems like music might be the only thing that, even if you don't enjoy classical music, and that might be simply because you weren't brought up with it, I think most people could hear a symphony or like go to a mass that has this like really beautiful polyphony and say, that was beautiful, or there's something different about that. They recognize that it's different because it has a certain type of order, or it's participating in a certain type of order that I don't think, I don't know if it's universal, but it seems as close to universal as you can get, whereas pretty much any other work of art, just a modern painting, a play, certain people might think that it's a beautiful work of art, and maybe that's because there actually is something deep there and they're picking up on that, but it doesn't seem to be universal. And so it makes me think that maybe there's something more to music that is almost universally recognized, as whether they recognize it as beautiful because they understand like how hard it is to pull off this concert, or whether it's just because it's different and it kind of strikes them in a different way.
And I think that's to the point, is that I think that's why it's incredibly powerful, because how many people have walked into the Latin Mass and been brought back to the church because of the polyphony that they hear, and it strikes them on a much deeper level of them understanding there must be a God. Like I think that people are much more likely to say that than by a piece of artwork. They'll say it with nature, but to see a painting and be like, oh, this is incredible, there must be a God. It's like the human gets too much in the way, whereas the music just kind of gets out. But again, it has to be the right kind of music.
Yeah. Do you think that is because if you see a work of art, most likely it's very easy to attribute whatever beauty you're seeing there to a person, whereas with an orchestra, it's like, I don't really know who's playing that note specifically, but someone's playing it and it's really beautiful, and it's almost like, because there's so many people involved, it's easier to think of it as like, almost like there must be a mastermind behind this, not just the conductor, but like there's almost like a spiritual reality there. Whereas if you see a painting, you're like, oh, that guy who did that is really talented because that looks just like a tree. But you wouldn't look at that and say, wow, God must exist. You might look at the tree and say that, but probably not the painting.
Yeah, although I think you would all have that also with a soloist if you just had a solo pianist sitting on. And I think part of it is because to be at that level of an artist, you have to be drawn out of yourself in a very intense way as a musician. Like you were completely the servant of. There's like humility, I guess, involved in it. Because here you are, you're taking a piece of work from somebody else, and they're telling you exactly what they want, and you have no say. Like so often, my teacher would just be like, "Larissa, why are you using those fingerings?" I was like, "Well, it's a lot easier than going up on the A string." She's like, "The music didn't ask that. I don't care how hard it is for you. You're supposed to do what the music asks." You're like, so there's this constant of like dying to yourself in a way to be able to bring forth somebody else's work. And maybe that's what it is, this humility that you're sent. Like, that's why when you see a great artist working, you're not thinking about the artist. You're just like caught up in. And again, but I think this is a big part of it is that music is linear, whereas a piece of artwork is static and you're just stuck there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't move you anywhere. You might be like, this is beautiful, but it's a snapshot in time that stands still. Whereas live music is not. And you have to move with it. And I think it just moves you outside of yourself that much more.
And I think most people would agree that live music is a higher form because everyone goes to concerts. Like you wouldn't go, I mean, there's something fun about going to a concert, and maybe if it's a celebrity, it's like you want to get close to the celebrity or something, but there's also just something intrinsically fun about hearing songs, especially if you're a big fan of the band, hearing the song that you know being sung to you live, and it sound, especially if they're really good and it sounds just as good, or you're with other people who enjoy it. It's more like, it's obviously more fun to be in the pit, like hearing your favorite song blasted really loud than just hearing it in your car. Even if you're with your friends, it's like, it's still more fun to have the live experience. What would you say to, do you think that, I know that sometimes they'll play movies and then they'll have a live orchestra. Do you think that the movie gets in the way? Like, I know they do that a lot with like Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, where they'll have the movie playing on a big screen and then the live orchestra, which obviously is a step up from just watching the movie with the recorded soundtrack. Do you think that the movie gets in the way of the music, or do you think that that particular type of music isn't the the deep soul uplifting music anyway, and so it's actually like kind of fine how it is?
I think it's fine how it is because I think it's made specifically for something else, and it's not in and of itself, and you can't. It's also very repetitive. I don't know if just because I'm rereading the Lord of the Rings, and like if you listen to the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, you're like, oh my gosh, he's just like using the same however many measures like over and over, like da 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 da, you know, like, and it's beautiful, but part of the power that it gets is from the visual. Like it's composed in a way for the visual and the like the oral to kind of fit in together. But some of this, I mean, there's also some stuff that's just like totally beautiful. You could listen to it away from the film, and it's totally. But also, again, it's just like really incredible to see how manipulative music is to a movie. Like if you ever have you ever turned off the sound to like a horror film or anything, you're like, oh my gosh, this is cheesy.
Yeah. I guess something that's kind of been on my mind, like I think when you talk about music with other people that are really into music, and probably for you, like specifically classical music, you probably all have like the same opinions. You have certain composers that you really like, certain songs that you really like, certain songs you're looking forward to learning that you used to know a long time ago and you're relearning. But for an outside person who's maybe not interested at all or just wasn't brought up with that, how would you encourage someone to kind of cultivate that soil? Because I would say the majority of people listening to this, and even people who don't listen to this, weren't brought up with that. And maybe they've stumbled across it, but I think classical music in their mind is like, it's with certain movies, and then if there's a neat orchestra playing somewhere in DC or at the Kennedy Center, I'll go. But it's not something that they're actively trying to cultivate.
Right.
But if it really is this like ordering of your, like almost like ordering of your appetite and being able to kind of, yeah, like cultivate your soul and to be able to pray more deeply or meditate more deeply, or I guess almost just be able to see reality better. Obviously that's a good thing to cultivate. So how would you, if you haven't been doing that, if all you do are listening to podcasts or all you do is listening to heavy metal, how do you find an appreciation for that without getting bored or without feeling like, I hate this, what's wrong with me? Like, you know.
Yeah. Well, it is like Suzuki said, it is a language. So it would be like, you know, going to watch a movie in French when you don't speak French, and after like 3 minutes you begin to zone out and you're not paying attention anymore really to it. So it definitely, I mean, I wouldn't say that people who don't know how to listen to it, I don't blame them at all. And that's partially the reason why sure, thank you, why I started this house concert series. My roommate in college, at UC Santa Barbara, she was a pianist, and she's a fantastic pianist. And it was the second year of Appaloosa, and Terry McKeegan asked if we wanted to come and play some classical music at the festival. And we said yes, and it was one of these like, what do we do? It's in this open room. People can come in and out whenever they want to. Like, heaven forbid, in the middle of a movement, like someone should sit down, or what if they get up in the middle of a song? All these like classical, like etiquette and everything that was just going to get like shot out the window. And we're like, you know what? This is awesome. We're just going to sit down. We're going to treat this like this is our living room. When people walk in, we're like, hey, welcome. Come on, sit down. And in between movements, we stopped and we talked about like, well, this is what this movement's like, and you want to listen to it. And we played a Beethoven cello sonata. It's a big work. It's it's a very solid piece. It's one of the famous ones. And then we played a couple of shorter pieces, the Swan and the Ave Maria and stuff like that. But we talked and joked around in between. And then afterwards, this big guy, he looked like a Harley Davidson guy, kind of guy, he came up to me and he was just like, gosh, thank you so much for explaining that to me. Like, I never knew how to listen to classical music, and this was so enjoyable, and wow, like, I'm excited to explore it later on. And that was the first time it occurred to me that, oh my gosh, people don't know what they're listening to. I grew up in it since I was 3, and it was like, what, you don't understand English? I thought everybody understood English, and realizing that's not the case. So then when I moved out here, I decided to give these house concerts, and I call them Painting with Music, where basically, like, if you know how to listen to a song, then you can see a painting appear before you. At least for me. Like, I always see in visuals. It's not always the case with everyone, but then I just started, like, I took a Bach suite, and before each piece, I explained what you're supposed to listen to, and then a whole bunch of shorter pieces, and that I began to see how many people, the response to it, and how they were on fire to begin to listen to classical music themselves. And so it's one of these things. I don't think a lot of people do it out there. That's why I'm kind of excited, because I'm in the process of making a website so I can get out there and start doing this. But I want to expose people to this and teach them how to do this. And it's as small as, look at the title of the piece. What does the title say? All right, like the Swan, for instance. It's the Swan, so I'm the Swan, the cello is the Swan, and the piano is the music. If you just kind of listen, you can hear the music, the accompaniment shimmering. So then if you imagine that it's the water, then you begin to see a whole scenario, and you're hearing as the music rises. It could be like the neck is extending itself, or the arms are spreading its wings or whatever. And so then the whole time you're like, oh, I wonder what's next. Oh, where is it going? Because you're listening to the music. So the title of the piece, I talk about composers, knowing a bit of a history of composers. It's really fascinating. Shostakovich is, World War I and World War II composer, and just constantly in fear. He was, at one point, he wrote an opera. I was just talking to this pianist that I'm rehearsing with in Philadelphia. He wrote Lady Macbeth, and it was dissonant and kind of, he was just like expressing himself, and Stalin was so upset. He's like, this is not the kind of music we want. He wrote a terrible review of him, so bad that Shostakovich started shaking, and he like for years he had the jitters because he was expecting for them to come and take him away to the gulag at any moment. And so a lot of his music has has this dissonance in it, because what he's trying to show is that communism seems all ordered on the outside. Stalin wanted everything super triumphant and we're happy and everybody's okay with communism. But he would write this music that in certain sections it was really rubbed up against each other and it was just like grating. And he was trying to show that communism is rotting on the inside. You know, and so like, you know, something like that, and suddenly you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm listening to this piece now, and I'm like waiting to hear where these bits of movements, like it's going in and out. It's telling a whole story.
Yeah.
You know, and like if people just knew that, then like Shostakovich is just one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, yeah, late 19th. And it's just like little tiny things like that. If they just knew, then this would be exciting. Then you'd be like, oh, I want to listen to this symphony. I want to listen to this sonata. I wonder what he does in his concerto. What does he do in this and that and that? You know. So
how much of that, like, of understanding a song is knowing the actual author, and how much is the content on like a scientific, actual like musical level? Because it seems like with a book, you can enjoy a book regardless of whether you've ever wrote a book. If it's a good book, you could read the novel and say, wow, that was a great novel. You might be able to enjoy it even more if you're a novelist yourself, because you can say, wow, how did he do that? And this character development, you can really like pull it apart, but just kind of on the face level, like, okay, I enjoyed that. So it seems like music almost might be the same thing, where you listen to a song and on kind of just the primal level, it's good. And then maybe you read into the author more and you're like, wow, that was written right around this time. And he dedicated it to his wife, which totally makes sense with, and maybe you can like read too much into that, but a lot of it's probably true. And so if you know a little bit of a background of that, I think you'd open your mind to the piece even more. But it seems like the last piece is actually understanding music and knowing like, wow, that's actually really hard to play, that I think a lot of people probably will never get to. But do you think it's enough to just know what this piece is about and the time period and who some of the, like you said, just the name of it, like, is that enough?
It is. I mean, there's a piece that I play. So in my like level 1 painting with music house concert, it's a bunch of shorter pieces that are like 3 to 5 minutes or whatever. And there's one in particular called Salut d'amour by Elgar, and it's like super sweet, and I was always like drawn by it, and I was like, oh, this is so cute. And then I found out that he wrote it for his wife right before he proposed to her. And it was this like, it's love greetings. And so you can just imagine, I was like, oh my gosh, like me knowing that now, I'm just like, you have this, oh, this is such a romantic piece, it's so cute. And then you hear the story behind it and you're like, oh my gosh. And you're moved on that next level. Like he was in love, and this was what he was writing for his wife. And it's kind of like really stamped in time, that you feel those emotions that he would have felt through this piece. And then you understand like, oh, that's why I'm moved. And when you understand that's why I'm moved, you don't have to, but when you understand that's why I moved, it kind of moves to the one layer deeper of getting ingrained in you. And then you're listening to it, and if you know a little bit of theory, then you're like, oh my gosh, he just did that. That's why I moved here. And so again, it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper the more research you do into something. But again, because of the power of music, you don't have to understand. Yeah, that's what I mean. It can reach down to the core of your being without you ever understanding. Yeah, it's kind of like, okay, the way that they describe man and women is like, man is more rational, and so like step A to step B to step C, and therefore E. Whereas girls like A, oh my gosh, E. And then like eventually we slowly make our way backwards, like D, oh, because D and C and B, and like, oh, now I understand why I thought E, and it's the same thing with music, is that you're experiencing it on an incredible intuitive level. And you can't explain why, but as you get more information, you're like, oh, that's why, because he wrote it for his wife. Oh, he wrote it in the key of like D major. That's why. Oh, this is why. And it just kind of,
Are you saying that the way that music is laid out is similar to the way that women think? Because that would totally make sense. I'm constantly confused by classical music.
Yeah, it would explain why men typically don't listen to classical music. Why you listen to acid hard rock.
I guess with that, where you say there's a story behind the writing of music, if you're sort of going like levels deep and couldn't. I'm gonna just kind of push back a little bit because kind of all I listen to is soundtracks and also classic. I listen to classical at times, but with soundtracks because I feel like, I mean, the music that you're listening to and you have a visual cue also to kind of give you an understanding of like what the music is trying to portray at the same time that the movie is portraying it. Couldn't that be also similar? Like where I'm trying to evoke sadness because the scene is very sad, and so I'm going to write it in a minor key or something.
Yeah.
That's how little I know about music in terms of theory.
Major, minor, happy.
But
sad.
for example, like
You got it.
in the movie Interstellar, Hans Zimmer did not know what the movie was about, and Christopher Nolan asked him to write a song about a relationship between a father and a daughter, just a theme, without knowing anything about the movie. And then he wrote the theme, and then Christopher Nolan told him about the movie. And so for him, it's like there's meaning behind the music that he's writing, and like a lot of composers for soundtracks, like they're trying to portray something that's I don't know, not just it's made for the movie, but it's also like there's something deeper that you're also trying to get with from the music, other than just it's made for this one scene.
Well, I mean, that's the thing too, is so not all music has a story. A lot of composers did not, and this is the whole idea of like there was a war between the composers of absolute music, which was music is for its own sake, and then you had people like Wagner who was like, no, it stands for something, like, you know, and that's why his whole like Falstaff and, you know, whatever, the Nibelungenkreis, and but in movies that are for film, they have themes because they're representing kind of like the way Wagner did, but there are universal concepts like love between a father and a daughter, and so you could kind of be more general about it and write a theme for it, but you won't find that in like a symphony. I do not think that composers thought, I want to write now a sad part in here, or I want to do, they heard music and they just like, I'm hearing this, I'm going to run with this, and I'm going to put these harmonies with it. And that was it. There wasn't this kind of idea of, you know, now it's going to be this, now it's going to, not at least earlier on. Later on, there is a little bit more of that. But so you can listen. There's a lot of beautiful film score music that on its own, that stands on its own, and but if you, it's interesting. It's like if you're watching it with a film, it doesn't get in the way of the film, and the film doesn't really get in the way of it. Whereas sometimes you watch movies where they put in a symphony, and you're like, this is kind of. It's very distinct. Like very often, I don't know why they have this, but there's usually like that Nazi like general who's listening to classical music in the background, whatever, you know, and that's distracting because you realize like it's very like this is classical music and this is the movie, and it doesn't blend in with each other. Right. In that kind of.
It seems like a difference. There's also kind of I don't know if this is a large disparity, but you were saying how music is linear, and so at any particular concert you might go to, you may have 10 different songs and they all have slightly different meanings or totally different keys or whatever. Whereas with a movie, there's kind of a consistent theme. And especially with something huge like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, you have these themes because when this theme plays, Darth Vader walks in, or when this theme plays, you're in the Shire. And yes, it's repetitive, but it's also meant to be repetitive. It's not a lazy repetitive. It's like, no, the flute playing and that slower paced music is because they're in the Shire, and so that's supposed to give you a feeling of peace and safety. Yeah. But when this other music is playing, you know that the orcs are running, and so I don't know how you would compare that on like which music is better, because you're comparing a 10-minute complicated piece that's very involved to a multiple-hour soundtrack that has reoccurring themes, and some of them are almost exactly the same, and some of them are entirely different. So it seems like it's kind of a hard comparison, but I do like the way that you separated, like if it's a good soundtrack, you can enjoy the soundtrack and enjoy the movie. But if it's a different piece of music that's not meant for a soundtrack, the movie's just going to be a distraction. And there is a difference. There's not, it's not just, you know, music equals movie better, right? Right. There's different camps.
it's meant to fit in some way into be complementary to the movie. But I think that's where the whole thing, like Wagner's idea of the leitmotif, which means, and this has started happening with his the ring cycle, is every time the ring showed up, there was a song. Like, so you could you're like, oh, the Falstaff is coming in, because it's like you were saying, the Shire. There's music very specific, and I think film score took that idea and made it to film, so that it kind of fits in more with, like, it almost explains the story more,
Right.
through that.
At what point did you? This is gonna be kind of a ramble. At what point did you kind of say that classical music is just, this is objectively good, and this, like in your case, this, I encounter God with this music? Because one of my best friends growing up, his dad was a piano teacher, and so all his kids played the piano, and all he was listening to and all his kids would be listening to was classical music constantly. And maybe one or two of them keep playing. I think they play the violin. But I've found that, like, some kids, if they were raised that way, not a resentment, because they can still see that classical music is objectively good, but if they're going to be playing an instrument, they don't want to be playing classical. They want to just move to some type of pop or something, or a cover of their favorite song, or whatever. So I guess with similar upbringings where you are listening to classical music and you do see that this is good, and you're playing an instrument, and your dad or your parent or whoever is pushing you to play an instrument, but there are different outcomes where you have some kids who don't ever want to pick up an instrument ever again, or you have some kids who still play, but they don't play classical music, and then you have some who keep playing classical music. So at what point for you was it just, this is objectively good, this is something that I encounter God with, and I'm going to keep pursuing this? Whereas, why do you think other, like, people have the experience of, I don't want anything to do with it, or
Right.
it's just like, it's whatever, it's there?
Yeah. Well, it always moved me very deeply. Like, ever since I was little, I had like a very intense experience of it, and so I think that just the more I was exposed to it, and the higher level of music I was playing, the more I experienced it in a it's kind of like a pebble that you throw in water. It starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I was just feeling it more and more, just to the point where finally it reached the banks. And I think this is probably when I came back here in 2018 or 2019 or something. Because in the meantime, I was listening a lot. Like, I loved Americana music, and I love to dance, so like things with dance rhythms and stuff like that. And but because I was exposed to classical music, I could tell it wasn't hitting me in the same place that this was, that the classical music was. And it's not like I stopped listening to that music. I was like, it's all evil. But I just find now I can't handle it. Like, I'm driving in the car and it just begins to grate on my ears. And I'm like, this is making me really nervous. It's making me agitated and on edge and everything. And then I think through COVID, or right before, when I started doing my house concert series, I think just because of seeing the reaction of people and my joy in sharing the story about classical music, I was like, okay, this is not subjective anymore. This is like, and I'm reading it through Greek philosophers and saints, and just like, I spend so many hours by myself that I'm constantly thinking about these things. Like, why? Okay, why am I attracted to this music? Or why did I, whatever, any of this. And I think the thing is with one, we don't live in a world of classical music. And so kids very often who play classical music, it's not a positive experience. They're the only ones playing, and all their other friends are playing other things. Parents forcing it on them. I mean, I'm the only one that, granted, I'm also not married, so that helps. Don't have children, but I'm the only one, I think, that ever really wanted to pursue it, classical music. And my sisters love it, but they're just not. I think it's a personality type thing too, And then for others, it is like pop music is really fun, you know? And so if you grow up with classical music all the time, you're like, but I just want to let my hair down or whatever. But for me, I'm like, I want to let my hair down. I want to listen to like Tchaikovsky. This is awesome. You know, like
Who's
I'm at
with me?
Yeah, exactly. Come on, you guys. Come on, girlfriends.
It's like the exact tone that a teacher has like on a kid's program, you know,
Yeah.
like to learn the ABCs.
Exactly. I'm like, hey, who wants to learn about, you know, Stalin? Let's study Tchaikovsky or whatever, Shostakovich. And the thing is that a lot of people always ask, like, well, how do I know what's good music? It's just like, you just have to expose yourself. And you know there are certain people that are always going to be great, like Bach. He's just like all this. So you start listening to Bach, you start listening to Mozart, and over time, and kind of like what you were saying about, it's so interesting how, like, if you read a lot of literature and you picked up a book and didn't know who it was, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this has got to be Jane Austen. This is totally her writing. This is, you know, you begin to recognize, if you read enough of one writer, you begin to see their style of writing. And it's the same thing with classical music. I used to teach music history at Christendom, and no one ever took me up on this, but I was like, you guys, for the period that we're listening, try only listening to that period the whole time that we're studying this. So we're going to do ancient for the next 3 weeks, only listen to ancient music. I even sent them like a playlist of medieval, you know, whatever, ancient music. And now only classical, now only Baroque, now only romantic. And after a while, you just kind of start getting acclimated to it. And I guarantee once you start listening to pop music, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, it's so repetitive. It's like so not imaginative, so unoriginal, so, you know, whatever. Like even the words, you begin to see how like trivial the words are. And you just don't want it.
It's it kind of reminds me of, I guess, like a good analogy that maybe could be drawn is how, I don't know if I want to do it with podcasts or with movies, but there's certain movies, I'll do it with movies. There's certain movies that you watch and you're like, that like either changed my life or was so good that if I wasn't already on the path that I'm on, it would have changed my life. You know, I feel like you have The Passion, where you're like, if I went to go see that and I wasn't Christian and I was doubting or didn't really understand the crucifixion or what that all was like, and then I saw that movie, that may have been a work of art that would have changed my life, or at least would have been a kick in the pants to like, wow, I need to like talk to someone who understands this movie, like find a priest. I think that would have been a call to action. But then there's also movies that they're dumb and they're not particularly well written, like The Princess Bride or something,
Right.
but it's just a good time.
Yeah.
So it would be wrong to say, well, I'm only watching like The Passion or like these high like Shakespeare adaptations or something, because that's the highest form.
Right.
And while you might be able to convince yourself and others that it's the highest form, I think it would be wrong to say, so therefore I'm not watching The Princess Bride. But it does seem like you'd kind of come to the conclusion of like, I understand that this is a cheesy, corny movie that just has a bunch of really funny lines and it's a good time.
Right.
So I'm going to watch it, check. Or like sketch comedy or comedians or something like that, where you're like, there's not a lot of depth to this, but it's enjoyable. And then you have something that's not, like, I wouldn't say The Passion is enjoyable,
Right.
but it's really moving. So it seems like you very similarly could say classical music, especially if you understand it, can be really moving and really beautiful and really deep and like, you know, really like makes you feel something. Whereas like country music or just like some ABBA or just something that's just like, oh, it's just a good time. But I don't think it would be wrong to say I enjoy that, but I also recognize that it's like, it's down here and classical music's way up here. Yeah. And if you don't have that, I wouldn't despair. I would just be like, oh, I don't know. Like personally, I don't know that much about classical music, but I don't say that I dislike it because I've heard it and hate it. I think I just haven't heard enough of it or don't understand enough of it. And I'm not willing to let go of the music that I like, but I'm also open to listening to more classical. So I feel like a lot of people probably need to be encouraged, like, not to drop everything because what you're doing and what you're listening to is bad and it's trash. It's just like, yeah, but consider this. Right. And then if you listen to that and listen to that, why is this one better? Right. And because I think it has to be a process, like with anything. Like
Yeah.
you need to, if you weren't exposed to it, you need to be exposed to it, and that might be a really long period of just surrounding yourself with that type of music or people who enjoy that type of music.
Yeah. I mean, I equate it to food, because if you grow up eating like, boxed mac and cheese and, whatever, your fish sticks and French fries, you're going to come in, you can't be like, you guys need to eat filet mignon. Like everyone's going to be like, well, I don't, where's my PB&J? And so
Yeah.
like you slowly start introducing them to their taste buds. Like we have oral taste buds
Yeah.
that have to become accustomed to it. But at the same time, I mean, I think we see this in life in general. Like there's a phase when you're just like, I want to watch Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure again tonight. Like you just get stuck in this place where you're watching that type of movie like all summer. Remember that one summer we were 15? That's all we watched. And like you kind of go through adolescence that way. But if you get stuck in that,
Right.
that's where it kind of becomes a problem. And the shame here in America is that there's no one to offer the next step. The alternative. So a lot of people just get stuck in that, Bill and Ted Excellent Adventure phase.
Right.
And I'm sure they would be willing to, but there aren't, like now we have classical concerts that are stuffy. It's like I'm going to one, which Foray's Requiem they're playing. It's absolutely, you should listen to Foray's.
I've heard that. It's awesome.
It's incredible.
They did it at St. John's like 10 years ago.
What?
Yeah,
Oh.
Dr. Alvin did it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to save up money so
It's
that for
really
my
good.
funeral, someone will do it.
Start a GoFundMe. It'll be
Yeah,
fine.
exactly. But $50, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's $50, but then I'm driving to DC and it's 20. Like this is not something. If you're like, I have no idea what classical music is, and now I'm going to spend $100 on it. Like that's not what's going to happen. And so, and that's part of that basically is my mission. Partially because I am on fire about classical music. I love it, and I really feel like, oh my gosh, if people just knew, they would totally love it. I'm like, I have Ghirardelli chocolate. You guys stop eating Hershey's. and so this arts and lecture series that I started, Green Mantle Arts and Lecture Series, is I'm going to do a 3-week series on how to listen to classical music, and I'm just basically starting with a very this is what a scale is, and this is what like a chord progression does, the first class. But then because I'm a cellist, I'm going to bring out my cello and play, the different Bach suite movements of the Bach suite, and listen to it so people can hear it live.
Yeah.
And we talk through it, we go through it, and it's like, okay, now you basically know how to approach any small piece in the Baroque and classical era. Go
Nice.
forth and listen.
Is that something that you're doing live, or are you recording it?
No, I'm doing
posting
it live.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think with my website, I do want to eventually, I think, do little tiny snippets and do recordings and post it. It kind of goes a little bit against the whole, the purpose is to hear live music.
Hearing it live.
Yeah. But you just realize you can't reach a lot of people that way.
Yeah.
And I think people just want to hear it. And then eventually maybe they will have me come and do an actual live concert.
Sure.
But
Well, I think the other thing you could do as well is, even if, although it would be ideal to say, this is what you should listen for, and then play it and have people in the room, if you either had a really good recording of it, or you say, here's a link to a really good recording, and here's what you should think about while you're listening to it. And so your role, either on the website or the podcast or whatever you're doing, is just the instruction part.
Yeah.
So they just need the audio or video of you saying what to listen for, and then they can listen to the music or go find an orchestra. And so you could even do that, here are 5 things you should listen for at the Requiem, at Foray's Requiem.
Yeah.
And here are the couple different, you could break it down in a classroom type setting, and then people could go listen to it live. You know? So
Yeah.
I guess it's not quite ideal, but also you're right. You could reach a lot more people doing it that way, rather than, I can only reach the 25 people that are able to come to this event that I can do once a month. It's that's...
And hopefully it'll inspire them to go hear live music. It's kind of a dying art, even amongst even folk musicians and everything. It's COVID really did a number on people getting used to listening to things digitally, and I think the more for me, this is not just oh, I like classical music and I want to share. It really feels like a mission, because the more we are on digital things, the less we are able to perceive beauty and truth. And I really don't think anymore people will come to know God through truth or goodness, because those are very subjective now, but beauty isn't. And it was interesting. I was listening to a podcast by Rick Rubin, who is a producer, a music producer, like super famous guy, and he was interviewing Stephen Pressfield, and they were talking. They talk about the muses. They agree that art is divinely inspired, even though it's like, well, whatever name you give to your, whatever. But it was interesting because they both agreed that what you produce has to be beautiful. And they said even ugliness needs to be beautiful. And that's the thing, what's so great about classical music is that you can have ugliness, but they do it in a beautiful way, because back in the age of classical music, before it started getting really dissonant, it was about the composers all knew that there was a God, and that they were serving, like they were inspired, they had a gift from God. And a lot of them struggled with they were not the perfect person. They struggled in a lot of different ways with like a lot of, sinful things in their lives, whatever. They weren't like super moral people. But at the end of the day, they knew that this was from God, kind of thing. And that they were producing a reflection of something outside of themselves. And that, so even if something is ugly, it was being portrayed in a beautiful way. What's happening now is that ugliness is being portrayed as ugly. And
even things that should be beautiful are being portrayed as
ugly. Yeah, right. Well, we have this distortion of it. And so I was just, because he said, and the reason why they said, oh yeah, for some reason, I don't know why, but people are attracted to beauty. Yeah, I don't know. I'm like, because again, that is how the pagan is going to experience God now, and not through goodness or not through truth. It's through beauty.
Yeah, and we've talked about that a few times on the podcast, more specifically about like architecture, how you go into some of these old churches in Europe and you're like, whoa, like I feel something, and whoever built this clearly was building for a higher purpose and was inspired and just did not pull out any stops. Like they just went all out. The floor, the walls, the windows, the ceiling, the frescoes, the paintings, the marble, like just everything. And you might have your own personal taste, but you can see they really thought that this church was housing something important. And now you walk into modern churches and you're like, honestly, it just looks like an ugly gym. Like, what are we doing here? Yeah. And I think you could say the same thing of a lot of modern music and a lot of modern art. You're like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. And maybe it takes a sophisticated taste to see this, but I just see a bunch of cans, or like I just see a splash of mud or a dot. Yeah. That's not beauty, and neither is just a whitewashed square with no tabernacle. That's not a church. And so it's kind of this. So in architecture, I don't know if there's a term for it in music, but in architecture, I think there's a term that's it's technically a style, but really I think its lack of style is like brutalism, where it's just like concrete, square, no color, all just black and white, gray, basically just like communistic building. That's kind of the idea. And that's the new thing, because it's clean and it's bright. You see this with even just new houses where everyone has gray floors, gray walls, white cabinets, but all just very dull. There's nothing that pops. There's no blue. There's no gold. There's nothing pretty. Yeah. It's just all very whitewashed. I assume there's something similar in music, maybe not in classical music specifically, but I mean, that's basically what rap is, or a lot of pop, where it's like you're repeating like blasphemous or scandalous things on repeat with some like
no melody,
kick drum beat and a little bit of a bass line, and it's a number one hit. You're like, what? Like,
how does that?
Why? I don't understand why this is so good.
Yeah. No, they definitely had serialism. I think probably was the closest to that, or atonal music, where it's just kind of. I mean, they wouldn't say that they wrote it in chaos, but it has a very chaotic feeling to it. But again, like what you're saying, is just, it's really sad that in the Catholic Church, it's like, where is the beauty? We were like
We own the beauty.
Yeah, we're like the people who, like, the reason why we have anything from antiquity is because of the Catholic Church. You know, they preserved all these beautiful things for us, and then now we're building these churches that have nothing in them. Like, how, like, what is going on? But that's what I mean. I feel like our souls haven't been like primed for that. Yeah. Why are we not crying out like, what? This is my church. Why don't we have something like nobody? Everyone's kind of like, oh, this is just the way. They're okay with it, you know.
And I think that's why it's so important to go travel. And Jordan Peterson, I think he went all over Europe on his tour, and he had either a podcast or maybe one of his lecture series, and he talked about how, like, no one comes to America for the architecture, but everyone goes to Europe for the architecture. Yep. They might not say that, but they're going there to see all of these beautiful churches and theaters and all this stuff. And it's not just because, oh, that's how they do it in Europe, but we do it differently in America. It's like, no, because that's how you're supposed to do it, and we just didn't do that here. Or we did do it in small, certain areas by elite people who could afford it, but like, we don't have multiple churches in town that are all Catholic, that are all gorgeous. You just have a couple, and they're nice for what they are, and they're nicer than a lot of other churches in Virginia or in the diocese, but they're not. I mean, the plainest church that I saw in Rome is 10 times better than anything I've seen in the States, with maybe 2 exceptions, right? Well, it's so sad. Like, we don't have patrons anymore. We don't have artists that come and spend 10 years on this project. It just doesn't exist, you know? Yeah.
Did you all go to Rome when you went?
I did not.
You didn't make it. Well, have you been to Europe? Have you guys been to Europe?
I
like
went
other
for a week,
areas?
To Rome.
Rome
for like a week. Then.
Okay. Was it just Rome that you did you travel around?
I went to a few different places. It was mostly in Italy primarily. So we went to Padua, went to Venice, went to I did not go to Milan, Florence.
Okay.
A couple of other places that were a little bit closer, Assisi, Siena.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's that's the thing that somebody else was saying, that one of my sisters was in Europe, and just how, even though as godless of a nation as it is now, the fact that you're surrounded by so much religious beauty, you can't get away from that feeling of like God being everywhere, even though, and that's the interesting thing, because when I was in Santa Barbara, it was a very beautiful place, but it was very painful because to me, it was hollow, because this nature is beautiful, and you had these people who rejected God, and suddenly everything just seemed, all of nature seemed hollow, like there was nothing there. Whereas Europe is, these buildings were made by like people's sweat and blood and tears and all the money that they had, and it's almost like for God. And so even though the people there that are there now don't believe in God, it's just like in the stone. Of the whole, you know, and that's I don't know, maybe it's because of our like puritanical, like mostly it was so Protestant here in America, but everything is just like we don't experience it anywhere, and I think there's like, it's definitely the fact that we're taking out arts out of schools and programming and all that. I mean, it's and I think that's why as Catholics we need to fight that much harder to bring back like music. Kids need to be playing music, and I know that like, maybe this is dangerous to say that here. This is like, sports has become such a huge thing in Front Royal for a lot of the families. And I'm like, you know, that's fine. But again, it's like the gymnastics. But you just do that, you're just going to have a brute. You need to have the other side of that in order to have a well-balanced place and to really like try to get people. But again, they're not going to, you don't want things you don't understand. So it's up to the people who do know a little bit about it to start bringing it in. And
that's something I've always really admired about St. Greg's, even though I have my own issues with the school or different ways that they do things. But one thing I do really, really admire, that they incorporate sports in such a strong way, because everyone that goes there is super into rugby or just like really, you know, aggressive, into sports, competitive. But they also learn how to play instruments and sing. And it's not, you know, it is particularly a boarding school, but and it's a male boarding school, but there's a certain like masculinity that you see even in these high schoolers who are just like being like not afraid to belt out a tune and recite poetry. I don't know how much of that is their own will versus how much they are just, maybe they're just forced to do it, but there's something there where it's like you have the capacity to both play sports and recite poetry and still feel like I'm a whole person and I can do this, and you almost never see that. It's always one or the other. You have like you were saying, you have people who really into music, really into the arts, but you're like, Yeah, but you
Yeah.
could not hold a day job, or like you could
Right.
not really do basically anything. You're just so weak because you're just constantly
Yeah.
playing music, and you never actually like
Yeah.
run around and play sports and go outside. And then you
Right.
have the people who are outside and playing sports and physically active all the time,
Yeah.
but don't really have either the intellectual side or just the ability to appreciate music and want to go to a concert and
Yeah.
want to like develop that particular taste.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and that's the thing too, is like a place like St. Gregory's is that it's there is an environment and a culture established. So whether it's whether the kids feel forced or not, it's almost like when you have something that's happening, upperclassmen who are doing it, the younger people are going to want to do it.
Yeah.
It's not, and also, the teachers who are doing it and all this other stuff, I don't even think there probably is any forcing of anything.
Yeah.
Maybe sports, because like if you grew up not playing sports, the last thing you want to do is go out in the field and start hitting people and get hit. You don't want to get hit by a person. But I think like very quickly, like they tap into that, and then it just
Yeah.
becomes this thing like we all want to be a part of this. But again, that's the thing. You can't just have. It has to be a cultural thing. You have to be. There has to be a petri dish here
Yeah.
in Front Royal where it's just like ready to grow completely around everywhere. You can't just have like one small group decide to do it, and then their kids are not going to want to. They're going to want to follow the crowd.
Yeah.
So it almost has to be like this collective understanding and desire. We want to grow in this area.
Right.
It starts small though.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems like with classical music that is something that's like the biggest hurdle, is even at like big universities, is like getting funding for it. And okay, when are we going to practice out, in addition to school hours that doesn't conflict with sports and all of that. I think here you probably have a better time with it because there's so many different homeschooling, co-op, private school type opportunities. It's probably a little bit easier, but I would assume that's still a fairly big roadblock, is just we need instruments and that costs money, and we can't do a Music Man type thing where we're like promising everyone that instruments are coming, but then I have to skip town. Like you have to, if you're going to try
tried
to,
that earlier.
Right, yeah. I know, I'm still waiting for my trombone. I paid good money for that.
Your arms
You don't
aren't
have
long
long
enough.
enough arms.
Trust me.
But it seems like, so what you're trying to do is saying like, you're like, I can play music and I can teach you how. But if you actually wanted to get into, I don't know if this is something you're planning on doing or not, but if you wanted to get into the actual instruction part of, like compiling a band or compiling an orchestra, and you gather other people who can teach the various instruments and conduct, that would be a great project, but it would need a lot of funding, and it would need there's a program that needs to be built out that doesn't exist here. And it doesn't exist in a lot of places, because a lot of places are just church communities, and a church community can get a gym and buy uniforms for a sport team a lot easier. While there's obviously complications with that, that's a lot easier than putting together a full orchestra for 10-year-olds. Like that's very different things. Is that something that you think ultimately needs to be done in order to build that culture, is to actually have a local, not just a college or high school program, but a local, like, I guess like middle school, starting a middle school program, whether it's affiliated with a church or a school, to build out? Or do you think that it's just bringing more people to the area that can do things like you're doing, and just kind of just exposing people to it, but not necessarily teaching it?
Well, it has to be both, and I think that's why, like, for me, I just realized everybody always asks me, like, how do I get my kid to play? It's like you have to have it in your life. Like when we growing up, my mom played. There was constant music playing. Everybody was playing. We had our own little petri dish of this happening. Yeah. So I'm like, the parents have to be on board, and they have to decide this is going to be part of our life constantly. But no, it's actually interesting because Edith Stein had asked me, or Divinum Auxilium had asked me to teach, to start a small chamber ensemble, and they were just like, well, what do you need? Just let us know what you need. I said, I need to see the kids. I need 2 different groups. I need beginner and intermediate, and I need an advanced group, and I need to see them twice a week. And I don't want to do it unless I see them twice a week, because that's another thing too. It's just like once a week.
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to do anything. I'm like, I'm sick and tired of teaching like kids who do something once a week and then they don't progress, and it drives me crazy. Drives them crazy too. Yeah, right. So I was like, I need twice a week, and I also can't do any of the fundraising. However, I back in December, somebody approached me. Actually, Scythian was like, we heard you had a program, and we wanted to donate some money to the program for programming, for you to be able to put on more things for the kids. And I went around the community, and that's the thing, is that people are hungry for it, because I asked like 5 different businesses and raised over $10,000 for this program to be able to, and it was great, because also Divinum was gracious enough to open it up to the community. I said, we need to have this more kids. I can't have just like 3 kids that I work with. So it was great. We're using their space. Kids are coming from around the area. I probably have like 20 beginner intermediates, but then the advanced group, I'm actually getting them gigs in town. So I'm just like, any business that wants to have a party, I'm like, live music. You need to have live, and they're playing classical music. And
just kind of like background music.
Yes.
Or
so they played background, like, so, but just cocktail party
dinner,
kind of music. Yeah,
Nice.
they played 2. They've already done 2 Christmas gigs, 1 gig at Christendom where they like everybody was raving at for and then the Divinum fundraiser. So it's kind of like, oh my gosh, we have something small. We're gonna be, I think Divinum for their graduation is doing a who's the Rheinberger Mass, and so I'm just gonna have the kids learn the instrumental part for it, and then accompany the singers for Rheinberger Mass.
Nice.
Like, this is something that nobody has experienced here, to hear live music, and just to have, just like, they need to taste it and realize what the town is capable of doing and having. And like, I can't do an orchestra, but I can do the strings part. So then having somebody else come in and be like, don't worry, I'll take care of all the winds and the brass. And then like, together maybe we can do this. But just realizing I can only do what I can do. And a big part of that is I can only do the creative aspect of it. Because the minute I start doing the business and then trying to figure out all these things, like nonprofit, just like everything shuts down. So it's like, so it's amazing that we have 20 kids that are willing to do this, and to have them play for everybody else. This is what gets other kids excited to start doing it. And that's how you slowly begin to create an environment for it.
Well, another thing too is, I don't know if they're getting paid to do the little gigs that they're doing, but if they are, then you're also presenting them with this thing of, if you keep practicing, you can play at a bigger event, or you can do your own thing. And then, hey, you're 18. Do you want to, start a little LLC and get some business cards, and then you can promote yourself? And you're actually giving them a path forward, because I think with music, especially classical music, people aren't given a path forward. They're educated and they're like, great, you're a doctor, go play. And it's like, where, like, I can't play at bars. That's not the type of thing. So you almost have to be able to tap into like a bartending company who can refer you, or a catering company who can refer you, or just venues who say, we have in-house musicians and they're a little bit cheaper because they're kids, but they'll come and play for an hour at the background of your party, and they're related to people that are coming, and it's great. Like, and if you could build out that network, then you actually give kids a path forward, or at least motivation to keep playing. Maybe even if they pick something else, or decide not to make music their primary thing, they see it as like a goal, like that they can actually achieve, and not just, you need to practice to get better so that when you're 18 you can stop, so that you're going to go do something different. Like, that's not motivation, right?
Well, if they're doing it now, because there's a couple of, I think they're 10 years old or 11 year olds. I don't know, maybe you shouldn't put this on air. I don't know if it's illegal to have them go out working, but
it's fine. They're getting paid a couple cents an hour,
right?
so.
Wait, isn't that like even
Exposure.
worse? I'm getting paid for them
when
to
they
play.
get off work at the factory, then they're coming to play.
As soon as the bell rings. But they they are getting paid for this, and it's cheap enough where I'm like, you guys, they're cheap enough because
IRS, do you hear this? They make more than $600. That is taxable income.
I'm going to keep them under 600. Cap them at that. But they and this is exciting for them. They're like, oh my gosh, but you know what? It's going to pay for their bow being rehaired, or their strings, or now they're saving up to buy a violin because they need something better, and now they're practicing more. And coming of Eastern European descent, I am a taskmaster. My mom always, and this is the incredible thing, is that she always demanded excellence from everybody, no matter what you were going to do with it later on in life. And even these kids, I'm like, you're probably not going to go on. Well, I don't know. There's 3 that are incredibly ambitious.
You specifically are not going.
I know I'm like, you're probably not going to amount to much at all. So no kidding. So keep this job. No, I'm kidding. I'm not that harsh. But
Don't quit your day job.
I will.
Or 10.
No, but I even tell, I'm just kind of like, it doesn't matter because I want you to be so good that you can decide whether you want to go forward or not. And the only way I can do that is by holding you to a really high standard because, again, like, you know, whatever, hearing Johnny's stories, you just realize what the human body is capable of doing if you put your mind to it. And that you decide, if you are here, decide to be a good player. And I will show you how to be a good player, but you have to decide that you're going to do it because I can't do it for you. But I will not let you get away with mediocre because I can't handle it. And I need you to get to the point where you can't handle it. And I always tell them this. I'm like, it's so funny. I feel like I'm like they're little robots. I'm like, you know, when does something change? And then they're all like, when we want it. You know? I'm like, that's right. You know? I'm like, it's only going to change if you want it. So you need to want it. You know, but the whole thing that's amazing about music is that the discipline that you need, the focus, the determination, like these are all things that are such incredible character builders of like, and today I just told like some kids were unprepared. I was like, you just let the whole team down. Like, don't come in here playing, like, you can't play and you have to show up. You're not allowed to play unless you practice because you're letting the whole team down. You know, maybe harsh words for a 12-year-old, but I'm like, that's not fair. You can't, I'm like, this whole, like, well, we're just going to let you come in for 10 minutes basketball. You know, everybody gets to play. I'm like, no, you can be good. You have to work harder. And so I feel like what these people are going to be getting if they hire these kids is excellent music. It's not notes.
Right.
It's not this kind of like charity case. No, because they understand that this is a gift from God that they are giving to the community. Yeah. And even the little ones, like the beginners and the intermediates, they're just like incredible. It's so cute because, oh gosh, it's so great being Catholic. Because you're like, it's Lent. Are you guys going to give Jesus wilted flowers? Come on. Every note you play out of tune is a wilted flower. And they all like stand up really straight and they start playing in tune and stuff. You know, you can use, but it's just really cute to see how they do get it. They get that this is a gift. Yeah.
And I think demanding excellence from like your children or your students or even just your friends is the way that you become a better person, and that's the only way that they're going to become a better person. And it's not specifically for the task. Like, you don't take a job necessarily because you're trying to get your way to the top and buy the company, but that doesn't mean you aren't going to put in a full effort. Right? You're like, you want to be someone who can walk away from the job and just be like, I did that to the best of my ability, as best as I could. Everyone here would say that, and I have another thing going, and I'm going to do something else. But that doesn't mean that I slacked because I was looking at something different. Like, and I think I hope a lot of the local sports camps, that's the goal of those as well. That's the focus. It's not. Yeah. We're gonna I doubt highly that the camps around here are like, all right, we're turning out NBA stars. Some of them could go on to the NBA. Yeah. Maybe if they go to a really competitive school and they go to a really good college and they do well, they could. But most of it is just character building. It's like, we want you to work hard at basketball because we also want you to work hard at work and at music and at ... It's about the character building, and it's about the discipline and just putting your heart into something that you enjoy, or maybe you don't enjoy it, but putting your heart into it because it's good for you. Right. Because it's like virtue building, not just because of the sport or the music itself. Specifically, even though that does obviously play a part. It's not like it's completely unimportant, but
experiencing the joy of the hard work that you put in, like today. Again, it's so cute. They're like these little 6-year-olds and whatever 8-year-olds. And today I was talking to them because I'm reading this. Stephen Pressfield wrote this book it's called The Art of War. No, The War on Art. The War of Art. I don't know. I always get one of the two. The War of Art. And in it, he talks about resistance. And so I was telling that to the kids today because they were all having a hard time learning the flats.
It's okay.
learning the flats on the circle of fifths. And, and so I'm sitting there and I just had this like little pep talk with them. I'm like, listen, you guys, there's so many things that we do not enjoy doing. You know what that's called? It's called resistance. And how the whole idea of like, when you're experiencing resistance, it's actually the devil trying to prevent you from becoming your true self. And that the neat thing about this book, it says how when you experience resistance, you know that's what you should dive into, because you know that's you're going to grow through that.
Right.
Yeah.
And that this whole idea of, and somebody said that they were like, well, I don't like, I don't want to do something I don't like doing because then I won't end up liking doing it. But at the end of the day, when you put time into something you don't like doing, you actually learn to love it. And that's the thing that what's so great for these kids is by not letting up on them and kind of pushing them into this.
Right.
They experience getting to the other side. And, as a 6-year-old to experience that, as an 8-year-old to experience that, of that joy on the other side of putting hard work into something. Because you're always doing that at home, but you don't get a chance to really, like, you don't enjoy a clean bathroom. Like, you don't enjoy your bed being made, or you don't even care if your room is clean. But when you can stand up there and play a piece with all these other, or you can read music with everybody else because you push through to the other end, it's like such an empowering thing to experience that as a young person, and then to be able to take that with you into every other area of your life later on.
War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
The War of Art.
War of Art.
Okay, yeah, the other one is by Shin Shu or something like that. The Art of War.
Art of War.
I was reading to them the Art of War.
Yeah, you're like, man, this is really
Resistance
dense.
push through.
Yeah, push through. Throw that dagger.
Like,
have a sword.
I feel like I bought the
Yeah.
wrong book. I wanted to read. I found this encyclical today that I've never heard of before. Obviously, I was like, okay, there must be an encyclical on music. I know that there's John Paul II's letter to artists, but there's one that I found, and there's probably more, called Musica Sacrae by Pius XII. And when I looked it up, it had this one, which is weird. On the Vatican website, it's never highlighted, but there was this one section that was just highlighted. I don't know if it was because of keywords that I searched, but I read through the whole thing, and I was like, yeah, that's the only paragraph that I actually want to read, so it worked out well. But in this encyclical, Pius XII says, music is among the many and great gifts of nature with which God, in whom is the harmony of the most perfect concord and the most perfect order, has enriched men, whom he has created in his image and likeness. Together with the other liberal arts, music contributes to the spiritual joy and delight of the soul. And then in the next paragraph, he says that St. Augustine has accurately written that music is the science or the sense of proper modulation, and is likewise given by God's generosity to mortals, having rational souls in order to lead them to higher things. And yeah, I thought that was well said. And it is interesting because it's very, at least from what Pius XII said, it's very Aristotelian, where he's talking about how, like, there's God puts order into all of things, and music is ordered, therefore music is ordered towards God. It's like kind of this correlation that he makes. Yeah, a syllogism where he's just like, God is good, God is ordered, music is ordered, music is good, therefore. Am I going to have to read this quote again?
So excited.
I know.
I think it is.
I don't know why my mic is freaking out. It must be mine.
It's just you. We'll edit it out in post.
It's fine.
Oh.
Really hit me while I was down.
Oh man! Again, I'm telling you, the devil's coming hard at this.
Yeah, I know.
I'm not afraid of you, Lucifer.
Juicy words.
And as soon as I start quoting a pope.
You said that.
All right, we're gonna test something. I'm gonna quote Francis.
Yeah.
We're gonna see if, oh my gosh.
That's staying in.
Pause out.
That's staying.
This whole part, stay in.
Wait, is it still up?
Just every couple of
I haven't
seconds,
moved it.
you just be like, Francis.
Okay, maybe that's okay.
Yeah.
Um,
It may be close to the table. I don't know.
Oh.
If there were a couple times.
Oh,
Okay.
you're the
wires.
wire,
The wires.
the cord, when you hit the table is tousled.
There we
Hey,
go.
the tech guy does know something.
There we go.
Great.
Yeah,
I'm just
wow. Well, that was
Mark, you're gonna edit all of this out. So.
Not the Francis part.
Not the Francis part. I want the clip to start with that, to start strong. We've been experiencing some technical difficulties.
I don't know if you read that paragraph before, but it sounded like exactly what you were talking about before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just pretend like you didn't read it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh my gosh,
Yes,
I had no idea.
No, am I supposed to hear myself? I don't hear myself. Am I supposed to?
I also don't hear myself
Oh.
super well, but
I don't hear myself
Interesting.
at
it's
all.
recording.
We can hear. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
I mean,
I
I
can
can
hear
hear
both of you
myself
guys
a little
pretty
bit.
easy.
It sounds a little echoey.
I
Oh,
hear-
I don't hear
I hear
myself.
both
Not
of
like
you
I did
guys.
before, but it's really hard
Just-
to pay
just-
attention if I don't hear myself.
Yeah,
That's fair.
just turn Larissa way down.
And then you can
We'll
like
edit it
over
later.
my words. You can superimpose
You guys are
somebody
not
else.
gonna make this editing process any easier.
Sorry. Okay, and cut. Take two.
Can you guys still not hear
Not
yourselves?
here.
It doesn't sound as like it's not in my headphones as much as it was, but as
Yeah.
long as you guys can hear it, then
Yeah,
it
we
should
can
be
hear
fine.
you guys.
Okay.
It doesn't seem like it's changed. I'm not.
No,
used to
yeah,
that.
it doesn't
Okay.
seem like it's
yeah,
changed.
I can't
Yeah.
hear anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like Larissa. I need to hear my own voice. Otherwise, I'm not doing this.
I'm aware.
My own soothing voice. Otherwise, no. Well, that's the whole idea of the harmony of like. So my dad always talked about God creating the world, and there was harmony, and then when the devil came in, cacophony is brought in, and cacophony is just the disorder of the rubbing against of
Yeah.
notes with each other. So with God, there's harmony, and the whole idea of also like that the planets were separated from each other at a certain intervals, but together the whole cosmos creates a harmony. And like at first you're like, oh, isn't that sweet? It's harmony, but from this one saint, the one that from listening to the stars came up with the Salve Regina. He said the Salve Regina was the intervals between the stars there that he heard. You're like, actually, no, there is they're creating a harmony with each other.
Yeah, and you see that. I think Jordan Peterson talks about that in his Genesis seminar that he has on the Daily Wire, where he talks about one of the first things that God does is establish that He's the orderer, because in Genesis it says like out of the void God created X, and so it's like out of just whatever was there, all of a sudden, boom, there's order, and God puts order into things. And then that's also how men participate in that image and likeness is by ordering themselves towards God. And part of the reason we couldn't do that properly until Christ came is because we didn't have the example.
Yeah.
But then once Christ comes and establishes the new covenant, now we have that example. Now we do know how to order ourselves because we have that example. And so it's like we have the image and likeness in real time, and then we can do that, which I thought was really fascinating. And Jordan Peterson, like I don't know if that's the thesis of his book, but that basically is the thesis of his book, is like the balance between order and chaos, and how, and I think he might even have, I want to say he went on Joe Rogan's podcast, and it was like 3 some hours. So I don't remember exactly where, but I think he talks about music and how music is ordering chaos, because you just have like the buzz of everyday life, or you just have musicians who don't know how to, people who don't know how to play instruments, but you train yourself in the same way that you would train yourself in virtue, and you find the virtuous mean, and that is order. And then when you do that for music, that becomes music. Otherwise it's just like you were saying, it's just noise, it's cacophony, it's chaos.
Yeah.
But then you train yourself, you know how to create a symphony, and then there's all of these things happening at the same time, and it's ordered.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that's
fascinating.
That's so for the first, I just started up my arts and lecture series, Green Mantle Arts and Lecture. Just was it last week? I had Sophia Cuddeback come on, and she because she gives this awesome talk on scripture, and I had her. She was talking about basically how amazing it is that we get to, as Catholics, we get to consume God in the Eucharist, but Protestants, like in God's divine providence, He like kind of saw the split happening, but Protestants consume the Word literally in their mouth. Like they are still able to take in the Word of God, and the Word was made flesh. For them, the Word is made flesh by consuming the the Bible verses, and it's made flesh within them, and then with us we get to consume. But there's this, like, we get stuck there. Catholics stay with the Eucharist, Protestants stay with the Word of God. But I think that part of the reason why I wanted to start Sophia with the whole the lecture series is because the Word is laying down the foundation, the soil, basically. And then music is feeding it with, I mean, the Word also feeds the soil, but she writes these little Bible quotes, and she has them laminated, and they're themed, either like, forgiveness or waiting on God or whatever it might be, like preciousness. And I was a little bit overwhelmed. I'm like, these are all great, and when do I move on to the next one? And I can't memorize them because I'm not Protestant. I'm like, And then this past Lent, I just like put them all around my house, and every time I walk past one, I just stop and I read it. And the whole idea is the Word brings harmony. The Word brings order. And if I consume the Word, again, the whole idea is for us, ourselves, to vibrate with the frequency of God. And when our words have a frequency. And if I am using the same words that are in Scripture, I am recalibrating. Like every time I walk away from God in any sense, I'm not thinking about Him, my calibration goes off. We see that all the time in the coffee shop where like, we have to recalibrate because it's making like crappy coffee now, espresso. It's like, yeah, but if you constantly have the Word of God that you're saying at every moment, then you're recalibrating and you're bringing yourself into the presence of God. And that is laying that foundation. Now you're like, now I am able to take in beauty. Or I'm able to take in, whatever it is. So like the arts, the lecture series, I'm having Nick Liebisch talk in March about the Old Testament, because I'm taking his 4-year. Are you taking his course?
No, but I've been looking into it. I'm looking into starting hopefully this next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know where he's doing it, but it's completely life-changing for me. Absolutely complete. This is my year 3 right now, and it was one of those.
Who is that? I actually have no idea who that is.
Dr. Nicholas Liebisch.
Liebisch?
Yeah.
He's the head of the Catholic Biblical School, which St. John's uses as like a CCD pretty much, I think.
Do they?
I'm pretty sure. Going through St. John's, I talked with the DRE. I think they use that
series.
Yeah, as I think they said CCD.
Interesting.
Yeah, or
you
maybe
mean for our CIA or for actual
no
CCD?
CCD. Yeah, I think he said it was almost like a contract they had with them, and it's like there's a year 1 is in Front Royal, but then year 2 maybe in Winchester, year 3 is in Personal.
Well, they start every year. They start in a different place, but then you stay. Like year 2 now is in Front Royal, but I started in Winchester. 3 years ago, so now I just always go to Winchester.
Okay.
But it's absolutely just this whole idea of like, if we know the story of Israel, we understand our story. And of course, like we grew up, we're like, yeah, I know the Old Testament and blah blah blah, and I'm like, it's not until you actually dive into it at the level that they are doing. And even still, I'm like, we're going way too fast in year 3 with the prophets. Like, we need to stay longer on Daniel and all these other. But like, what struck me really about this Bible study course, or why it's so important to know about the Old Testament, is like, we hear about God's mercy all the time in the New Testament, but we see it played out in the Old Testament. We don't understand what the mercy of God means in the New Testament, because like we do kind of now because we're looking back. But if you're just looking at the New Testament and you had none of the Old Testament, you'd be like, well, Jesus keeps on talking about this mercy, but what is he talking? Like, what's this mercy he's talking about? And you're like, oh, from the moment that he created Adam and Eve, and over and over and over. And then you're like, oh my gosh, God wasn't the one that was angry. It's the people that keep on messing up. And it's just like this amazing, So anyway, so I'm having him come give a talk, because again, this is all foundation for us to be able to like take in now beauty and like you understanding it better, in the sense of everything that we create, like we're made in the image of likeness in God, and how he's constantly calling us in to like the 7th day. He wants us to rest in him. But part of it, like he's a creator. Everybody, all of us are made to be creators ourselves, to enter into the creation of God, and in some way, whichever way it is. And in the artist's way, Julia Cameron says we're all creators. And whether it's making something at dinner time, and that's the whole point too, is that like I want to be doing art, but I also want to bring in, like, you can create coffee. When you make a cup of coffee, you're participating in God's creation by, you got to know something about the coffee. And then, so you're not just like, I'm boiling this water and just pouring it in there. It's like, well, it's actually kind of good if it's not totally, it's not at 219. If you bring it down to 215, then you're not burning the coffee, you know? And then you're approaching, you're like every day, every moment is giving you an opportunity to allow God to enter into your life. And then, so then when you do see an piece of artwork, you've just like, your whole day has already been primed to receive the art. So I don't know. Yeah, that's my.
This is yeah. I have like 4 questions. I'm hoping I remember them all. But I guess the transition that I wanted to make, I was going to do it later, but I think now would be better. You were talking about how making a cup of coffee, like something as simple as like making a cup of coffee or whatever, is participating in beauty, because there's a correct way to do it, or maybe a like higher form that maybe takes more time or is more expensive, but it's the better way to do it, and we should do that. It made me think of bartending, which you've gotten to recently, and I don't know how much more you're going to get into it, or if you're passing that on to other people here at Manor Line and Front Royal. But what you said really strikes true with me personally, just because I enjoy bartending, and there is something beautiful about just buying a good bottle and enjoying it, like what we're doing right now. But there's additionally something more beautiful, even though maybe it's not as an expensive experience, right? Like a mixed drink could be really cheap, but there is a way to do it. Like there's a certain type of ice that you need. Yeah. There's a certain type of glass, and it's better if it's frosted in some cases. And then there's a certain way that you make it, and the order that you put the ingredients in, so certain ingredients don't lose flavor, or so it adds flavor. And you can marinate things, and depending on how far you want to get into that, it's very similar to the cooking stage, or to the cooking. I don't even know what you would call it, culinary experience, right? Where you can have fried chicken, but you can also have fried chicken. Where it's like there is a way to do it better, and if you just want to do it the plain way, there's nothing wrong with that. But there clearly is a difference, and so I think like bartending is that way, where there's kind of a science behind it, and it's fun to get into the different liqueurs and mixtures and syrups and what tastes better, and you know, people have different preferences, and so it's almost like there's no right answer, but at the end of the day, you can taste a drink and really like it, and taste the exact same drink at a different bar and hate it. And if you're a good bartender, or at least a connoisseur of drinks, you'll know why. It's like, the ice wasn't great, or they didn't shake it enough, or I didn't like the bourbon they used, or the cherry wasn't, it was a maraschino cherry and not a Luxardo cherry. And there's all of these tiny little like intricate things that you can do differently that's going to make it better. And it's worthwhile, even though it's kind of a small thing, it's worthwhile to go the extra mile.
I mean, I totally agree, because I mean, that's the thing for me, is that, I mean, I wanting to go into biology, I loved science. I loved like measuring things out in chemistry class and being exact and everything. And so something like bartending is like kind of good, because there is a science to it, but at the same time, it just comes down to paying attention, and nobody pays attention to things anymore. And so like when I'm making the drinks, it does come down to like, you guys, it's just a hair over a half an ounce, because at 3/4 of an ounce, it just and you sip it, you're like, where is it going on my mouth? Is it my whole mouth? Is it my sides? Okay, I need it just going straight down the middle. It can't. It's got to fill the whole tongue.
I want the umbrella effect.
Yes, you need the umbrella effect with the shoot down the middle after the Moscow Mule kick in the back afterwards. But the thing is it's just because when you pay attention, and if you and this is the thing, is that people don't know how to drink, because nobody showed them how to drink. They don't know how to eat.
Right.
They don't know the difference between fried chicken and fried chicken, because nobody taught them.
I didn't do the accent.
Well, I knew what was meant, because you've never had fried chicken. But when somebody says, no, hold on a second, when you bite it, nobody knows how to listen to classical music, because nobody's pointed it out. It's not hard. It's just paying attention. And that's why through this arts and lecture series that I'm doing, I want to say, listen, you don't know much about music or visual arts, but everybody drinks coffee. Let me show you how just a daily thing you can put just a little bit of attention to it, and now your world opens up. Right. Now, like, I want to get Alex Klassen to come in and do a charcuterie board, and it's like a date night where you come with your wife, and you give $20, and and then you bring your own board, and she shows you how to make. I don't know if you've ever seen her charcuterie boards. They're just like, again, there's like charcuterie board and charcuterie board. So, but now when you have friends over, you have a beautiful visual thing that you put on the table that your kids see all the time, and they're beginning to be surrounded by beauty just because there's attention to detail. My mom was huge into attention to detail, and I think that's where we all got it from. But that's the thing, is that like somebody needs to show. Oh, and I'm a little bit. It's hard because lately there's become this fascination with drinks and food. It's almost like the gastronomy. It's a little bit disgusting. Like, it kind of makes me nauseous a little bit. And so I was kind of debating, like, is that right to be putting so much attention on coffee and food and da-da-da? And I was like, no, it's okay, because what I'm trying to do, it's not for the sake of, like, outdoing it or whatever. It's like, no, because this was a gift given by God, and we need to handle it the right way. Right. And if all you need to know is that don't have your water boil at 220. Have it down to 215. Just open it up for 3 seconds. Let the steam come out long enough so when you pour in the coffee, it doesn't taste burnt anymore. Bam. But you have to pay attention to your coffee when you're doing that. Right. You can't just space out. And again, the whole purpose of our life is to bring us into the present moment, because that is where God is. Right. And if you're paying attention to everything that you're doing, whether it's the dishes, like how often do we zone out in life? Like, all the time. But if we can be doing dishes and like scrubbing here, I'm putting soap there, I'm putting, like, it's amazing how you begin to feel the presence of God. And I was reading once, I can't remember which saint it was, but he was saying that back in the old days, nobody had a spiritual director because there weren't enough priests. So the way that people heard God's voice was by doing their daily duty. And I was like, okay, and your daily duty is like, okay, I need to go to work. No, your daily duty is to put your full attention on the dishes when you're doing the dishes. When you're putting the laundry in like, that is where you begin to hear God's voice, because God is in the present moment. And so like, through all these different things, and that is what art does. Art forces you to put yourself in the present moment, but the awesome thing about art is that it also calls you outside of yourself. You cannot meet art standing where you are. If you really truly encounter it, it pulls you out of yourself. And by doing that, your hands open, and then you're naturally in the receptive mode. And you're not paying even attention to what you're receiving. That's why, like, it can be so healing to encounter art and beauty in the real way, because God enters in and starts healing you in the area that you need to, because you're not looking specifically for it. It's just this kind of like, he knows where you need to be healed, and you're just standing there with arms open, just like taking in beauty. Yeah.
Something really beautiful I heard not too long ago, actually, was a quote from Jason Everett, who gives a lot of chastity talks to teens and stuff. And he was talking about how people would come to him and just be like, I'm struggling with despair because I can't be loved because I messed up in all these ways. And he was like, a really simple way that I get through to these kids is to say, well, a broken heart, while it's sad, is not a bad thing, because then that's how God gets in. Because he was like, if your heart's not broken and it's closed off, he's not gonna enter your soul. Now, if you actually parse that out theologically, that's not entirely true, but it's like, in your brokenness and in your despair and in your, kind of at the end of your rope is where God can step in, because you've created space, because you've cut yourself off from everything else, and then he can come in. And I'm not saying that you need to be at the end of your rope to listen to classical music, but kind of in that way. I understand that that's how it sounds.
That was the segue.
But yeah. So anyway,
and thank you for coming.
Yeah. It's been great. No, but it seems like kind of in that way. Like, even if you're uneducated about it or not, haven't been brought up with that, just because you have a lack of that in your life doesn't mean that there isn't a space for it, and you shouldn't view that as, I wasn't brought up with that, I don't enjoy it, I heard Bach one time, hated it, so I'm just going to close myself off to it. It's like, well, maybe you need to open your mind a little bit to really what you were saying is like living intentionally. And that's something your brother-in-law, who's one of our former professors, Dr. Hedeback, talks about all the time, is that a lot of what human nature comes down to is just living intentionally. Like, why did I do that thing? Why did I say that thing? Why am I eating this thing? And it's not to question everything and to have everything be an existential crisis, but it's to center yourself on where am I going, and if that is the goal, which is an important part, like if God or the beatific vision is my goal, what am I doing from between here and there to get myself there? And really, it's just a series of good decisions and intentional decisions. And if listening to classical music is a way that I can become centered and grounded in my faith and have a deeper soul, okay, great. I agree to that, rationally, but practically, how am I doing that? Does that mean that like just I'm going to start Lent off by only listening to classical music, or does that mean like it's not going to be the same solution for everyone, but being able to say I want to intentionally incorporate this into my life, like even just surrounding yourself by people who appreciate it. Like Jordan Peterson doesn't talk about classical music all the time, but all of his podcasts open with it's like 20 seconds or 15 seconds of classical music, and then some of his episodes he talks about it, and it's like how many people are persuaded by that or have never even heard classical music, even for that 10 or 15, 20, whatever it is, seconds, listening to his podcast, and maybe they look it up later. And he had a couple of podcasts that he's talked about music specifically. One of them was with Oliver Anthony, who was that guy who wrote the Rich Men North of Richmond that went viral, and he called him, and they just talked about music, and probably half of it was about classical music and all of these things. And it's like millions of people listen to that. How many people went and made playlists based off of Jordan Peterson's recommendations? Probably a lot. Like I looked up some of the songs he recommended, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you never really know how many people you're touching by recommending that, and then being able to start something like you're doing just to really put it in people's faces, like here's classical music, there's food, come, you know, like it's gonna be great.
Yeah, well,
So,
I definitely do that. I include food and wine in my concerts usually.
Yeah.
Partially because
It makes it easier to listen.
Well, it definitely does. I sound a lot better with
I need to hear myself.
no, well, part of it too is just familiarity and comfortability, and it's one of the senses. And so you're eating food, you're drinking, and you're like, this is just another way of reaching one of your senses. And we're so familiar with food and like taste that it just makes it more comfortable. Really, like this is just like everything else.
And it's the sophisticated version of going to a pub where a beer and a burger taste good, but when there's like live Irish music, it's way better.
Oh yeah.
Even if it's the same food. It's kind of the same thing. But if you're especially with you, it sounds like you're pairing things that are a little bit more classy with the experience, which I don't know if this is true across the board, but I think that there is something mental that goes on when people drink wine. Wine specifically, when people drink wine, everyone gets really fancy.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't even matter where you are. I mean,
know.
like everyone gets really fancy. Like, I
what
guess
you're wearing.
I want to say, let me rephrase that. In a social setting, if you're at home, you're not like putting on a suit. But like if you go out,
I always get a British accent when I start drinking.
so you haven't had enough.
Calling
Is what I'm
everyone
hearing.
darling.
Yeah, darling.
Darling.
No, but there is something about that where like I think if you're in a social setting and there's beer or cocktails, that's much different than if you're. Because usually when there's a setting where you're serving wine, it's a little bit fancier. But there is something about like being in a setting where there's wine being poured. It's especially if it's nice wine and you have actual glasses, and like there is something about that where whoever's putting on the event is trying to get you to be more sophisticated, kind of like kind of forcefully. But that's not that's not a bad thing. Like I don't think that's a bad thing. But like people do that all the time with what is it like? Art, wine, and cheese nights, where it's like we're giving you fancy cheese and wine so that your art looks a little better, or at least you feel better about yourself. Or maybe a little worse. Maybe a little crooked.
Just because they throw the wine on it and then it looks like
and then it's like
wine.
Take that.
Yeah. I call this wine on a canvas. Yeah.
I think one cool thing you guys were talking about, and something I'd been thinking about as you guys were talking too, was. Talking about how earlier we were talking about how music, or I guess humans are created to. Obviously, we are created as image and likeness of God, but we're also created as with the ability to be creator as God is creator, and with that is putting order in things. So like. Good music, and you were saying before that classical music can even I don't know if it was a quote from a philosopher or maybe just something that you had said, but how if someone was just able to listen to music their whole life, they would know right and wrong.
Oh, right, yeah.
Which is super cool because something that is so rightly ordered can change the way either the environment is, but then also how this person grows. And so it made me think of Jordan Peterson, but then also Jocko, just with like something Jordan Peterson says is like, make your bed. So it's like, get up and make your bed. So that's like starting your day, ordering your day.
Yeah.
And then also trying to be intentional about like ordering things. So eating something in a particular setting or drinking something in a particular setting. It is really cool to think that just by being intentional and ordering something, like thinking about what you're doing, like the dishes or something, you can not only change the environment, but then change dispositions of people. And music is, I guess, I was trying to think of, as you were talking about music and how you're bringing classical music to Front Royal, it just struck me because a lot of the time, whenever I think of wanting to change something, I think of the family. So the family, like it has to start in the family, starts with the parents, starts with the kid, with the children. But then I was like, but also in the community, that's a really good place to kind of saturate these families within it so that they can go and have, I guess, a lot of music in their home and start their children learning things. It's just really cool to have all of, like, if the community is ordering, or if there's a particular thing in the community, like music, that orders certain things and orders the family to have a certain disposition for things, it's really cool because as humans we're supposed to put order in things, and when we put order in things, we are imitating God in that, and then things flourish. Like as you kind of said, music is not like, we have a lot of intellectual like the schools and everything, but then also sports and all that's fantastic. But then if music is also added in, it is really cool that it blossoms even more. So it was just just striking me, the order.
Did you bring up Jocko because of make your bed? It's a win. And then you brush your teeth, and another win.
Good. You brush your teeth and then eat chocolate.
Yeah, exactly. Drink your protein drink. It's a win.
This will be a quick, interesting story. We just had a priest on the last episode who is like personal friends with Jocko.
Oh, really?
Which I didn't really know how close he was until I spent an entire day with him. But he ended up getting a text from one of Jocko's like team leaders while we were talking and all this stuff. So we were like, kind of the whole day I was just shocked how close he was. And he talked about like, oh yeah, I went to Jocko's gym and worked out. I was sat in his podcast studio and I was like, this is so cool. Like, that's going to be awesome. And then legit the next day I saw on the news that Jocko's gym burned down. And so I texted him, was like, Father, what happened? Was he listening? I mean, we haven't even like released it yet. And I was like, that is so ironic that like we were talking about him, about his gym, and then the next day it burned down. And I was like, I told Father, I was like, I guarantee his reaction is going to be like positive. He's going to make this. It's a win. So there's a reaction. There's firefighters going through with a camera, and then later Jocko's walking through, and they're kind of pointing out like, here's where we think the fire started.
I'm still working out. Win.
And then he looks at the camera and he was like, we'll rebuild. It'll be better. Good. And just like walks away, and everyone's like, of course. Like, of course you're like, oh, we'll upgrade. It's going to be great. But I mean, there's something to that of just, okay. Let's go.
Well, and that's the thing that's like, I mean, we need those kind of people. We need Jocko, someone like who's just like about fitness completely. And then we have like Sensum Fidelium, which I love because I love their talks. And there's like spirituality, and you have people in different, but the thing is that I think sometimes we get totally caught up. We're like, how do I be a better person? I'm going to be working all the time. I'm going to be eating this. You're like, hold on a second. Like, you're working like the bicep on one arm, and like, what about your triceps, and what about your forearm? Like all these other things. You just kind of like have to be a whole complete person. And that, like, again, every single person is a reflection of God, and like one particular aspect of God, which is incredible. and that and it's up to us to be as whole and complete as we can, so that we can reflect that little part of God. And the creative aspect, like you said, is just like that's a part of God. That's who He is. And then so if we're just cutting that, if we're letting that part atrophy, it's just like, it's a shame. The world is less bright. But again, the only way that one can create is if one takes in first. And like this whole image, my dad always talked about this. He's like, you know, God breathed into Adam, and then what did Adam do?
Sin.
And
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well,
Sorry. No.
It's got to be more specific.
Sorry.
We're like A to B. You're jumping to
yeah,
E.
exactly. I'm already at E, you guys. All right, I'll take it slow for you all. No, God breathed into Adam, and he inhaled, and then he had to exhale in order to be alive, to come to life. And so, you know, we need to be taking in the world, but we can't just hold. We have to be able to let out as well. And what's happened now with time is that we don't know even how to take. We don't know how to receive anymore.
Right.
It's just consume.
It's this. It's the
Yeah.
grabbing, and that's what my dad was also saying. Like, the problem with the feminists is you see them at mass. Like when the whole idea with what? Oh no, why are you about feminism? Oh, you looked at him. You gave him a look like,
No.
he's bringing. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm
Don't worry, I
happy
didn't say your name, so nobody on the podcast knows who I looked at.
I love feminism.
Somebody gave. I was like, oh no, this is a sore topic.
I mean, it wasn't me.
Anthony
That was
gave
pretty
the
clear.
raised eyebrow to one of the other two. I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. So the whole thing with when people started receiving in their hands is, he said, you could see the feminists would come up and they would turn their hand and they would grasp it. And this is the whole idea, is that we are grasping, and consumerism is grasping, and there's no receiving. And when you stop receiving, you can't. You stop breathing out, and you know, and that's the thing, is like, your creation, like, we don't see anything creative anywhere. Like, I mean, even with drinks, it's just like, it's all recycled.
Right.
It's like basically the same drink, just different proportions, and the same food and the same everything. It's like, it's just beginning to like, it's like nauseating how there's nothing, but it's because like we've stopped learning how to receive.
Yeah. I think you see that a lot too with like social media content, or online creations, or online what are the influencers, right? Where it's not as much of, here's an idea I had. Like Jordan Peterson, he'll quote other people, but he'll say, they thought this, and then here's how it relates to that, and he adds on to it. Yeah. But a lot of social media gurus and influencers and whatever, like, they'll have people on their podcast, but they're not really saying, oh, you think that, I had another person on that thought that, how do you reconcile X? It's just, oh, cool, sweet, let's post it. And there's not really a conversation, and you can tell. You can really tell, and if you listen to enough podcasts, depending on what type of podcast you listen to, you'll get into a lot of these like health and wellness podcasts, and it's like, it just sounds like they're reading off a computer, or they're quoting someone else, but they're not actually thinking for them. They're not thinking through in real time what the person or the host or the guest rather that they're having on is saying. And they're not saying, you're saying that, I believe differently, not in an aggressive way, but just how would you respond to this? Or I had another person on who would 1000% disagree with you. How would you respond to them? Because they know people are listening, and they probably listened to the last episode, and now this next episode is contradicting. So they're trying to help their audience come to the truth, and not just, sounds great, next question. You know, It all sounds rehearsed, and I think you see that a lot. There's just, like you said, there's not a lot of creativity in movies and music. A lot of it just sounds recycled, and
and that's what I was just talking to some friends of mine who are artists this past weekend, and we were talking about AI, and she's a photographer, and me being a musician, and he's a writer, and he was saying that he can tell when an AI has edited a writing of some sort, and I was like, oh, I don't think I would be able to tell that, and she can tell when an AI picture has been created. I can't tell that, and they were like, but I can tell when it's digitized music. And it's because you spend so much time in your own field that you can pick up, but you can't pick
You
up
know
on
the real
others. The
thing.
thing is that the reason why I can't pick up on hers is because I don't know how to look at photography. But it wouldn't take long for her to say, listen, this is how you look at photographs and how it comes to life. And then afterwards I'd be like, oh yeah, that's airbrush, or that's, you know, you could say, and the same thing with writing in this kind of way. It doesn't take much. Like, I think it's a duty for us to kind of be able to open the eyes so that we can start recognizing when things are fake and when they're real. Like, I think we have to. I mean, it's like detrimental if we don't, because we're going to start consuming plastic. Like, it's like consuming plastic food. Instead of saying like, no, hold on a second. This tastes like something. This doesn't. This will kill you. This gives you nutrients. Don't eat the plastic. And you're like, oh, okay, you know. But after a while, if we're consuming things that are digitized, it's going to kill our souls. It's not real. And so it's like we have to teach our kids that. We have to take them to live music. We have to, like, all these things is that it's not, especially, sorry guys, if you're having kids, like, it's your duty to preserve. To preserve, you can't just go on autopilot and be like, I grew up listening to Aerosmith and like whatever, whoever else, you know, kind of thing. It's like, this is their soul, and it's up to you to you. But also I have a duty living in the community. I was given the gift of music, and I've been put in positions where I've had to teach it, not to the point where like I understand how to teach it to people that don't understand. Like, it's my duty to reach out and start creating opportunities for people to be able. The problem is having people be interested enough to come, but
Yeah, sure. I guess maybe a closing question, unless you guys have other questions. But I was just thinking, I've kind of been thinking about this the whole time. Is there's a pretty well-known author in the Catholic sphere named John Senior, who wrote The Restoration of Christian Culture and also The Death of Christian Culture and a lot of other stuff. And one of the things that he talks about, and I actually haven't read this personally, but I've heard another show talk about a lot of his writings, and they said that in one of his books or one of his articles, maybe, he talks about how really for the Christian, everything revolves around the Mass. Everything. Like music, architecture, ceremony, liturgy, tradition, drinks, like all of it revolves around the Mass and the history of Christianity and the Bible. But paramount is Mass. If you think, as obviously you're saying, that classical music is kind of where the buck stops, like this is the highest form of music, I guess, number one, why do we not hear it at Mass very often? And if we should hear it at Mass more often, how do we do that? Like, do we need to go seek out places that offer it? Or is that something that we need to be active in our parishes to get, to say, no, we need to have a full orchestra more or less at Mass for these different Masses? Like, that, not to say that they need to be playing movie soundtracks at Mass, but
right.
playing pieces that are fit for or specifically crafted for the Mass. We need to have that just as much as we need to have organs back and not just keyboards and full choirs and not just a random soloist with a guitar. Like, we need to have the fullest experience of the choral and the musical structure that we can. How do we go about that? Well, I guess number one, should that be the case? Like, or is classical music something that needs to be enjoyed for its own sake separately and not at the Mass, like very specifically not at the Mass? Or two, if it is supposed to be enjoyed at the Mass, how do we find that, or how do we kind of cultivate that?
Yeah. I think it's different because I would say music at the Mass would be more sacred Mass than classical. To me, like, in my mind, classical means something more that you sit back and you enjoy, whereas sacred music is something that you enter into. And there is a difference because you can get very like like Masses that are written that are pretty emotional. I think they take you out of the music. But I know the most amazing experience that I have had of music in the liturgy was when I went to Israel. I went to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage, and at that time so my brother-in-law was leading it, and he always has a Latin Mass priest come with him. and I always had a hard time with the Latin Mass, partly because I'm Byzantine Rite, and we are just like constantly singing and praying. Like there's so much involvement of and then suddenly you go to a Latin Mass and there's like nothing. I'm like, what about me? You know? And then this is a whole different. Like I need to hear my voice. I need to hear about like. You know, that's a different podcast that we can go. But yeah, in a way, it's just kind of like, where's my involvement in this? Like, and but then there was a group of 4 siblings. They have a Harpa Dei. If anybody ever wants to check this out, and I think it's awesome for any Catholics. They have a channel. And because they're siblings, they have these like incredibly blending voices. They sang parts of the Mass during the liturgy, and it was the most like, I was like, oh my gosh, this is what the Latin Mass was meant to be all along. And it was, so my experience of the Holy Land in general was this like, why do I feel like kind of out of body experience? I'm not really on earth, and I'm not in heaven. I don't really know. And it didn't occur to me until afterwards, but I felt like I was in this middle land, and it was just like you're surrounded by like holy smoke everywhere and incense, and like even when you're out in the Jordan River, you're just like there's incense everywhere. And and the thing that I experienced was that it wasn't that God came down to earth. It was that God was extending his hand and having us come up to him, like in this middle. It wasn't heaven and it wasn't earth, but we were brought into this like middle realm where it was just like holiness all the time. And that is what I was like, that is what the Latin Mass is supposed to be. And that, unfortunately, I think a lot of Latin Masses, you're left here, the priest is up there, you're like, wait, what about me? And you don't have this in between. But that was what the music did for me. It was this like continual prayer that was it was like lifting me out of my own thoughts, and which can happen very often when you are when it's so silent. But then with the prayer, it brought me into that middle level. So I think that one has to be very careful with the kind of music that they bring in. Also, people don't know how to listen to it now, so it's really tricky. You can't just bring in like Mozart's Mass, like a Misa, whatever, or whoever, and people really fully get what it is. I think it would be beautiful, but we're not used to that now. So it's almost like it would be disruptive. Yeah. At the same time, I think I'm not a huge fan of like music after communion or anything. I actually don't listen to music for the most part when I'm by myself. I'll turn on the radio every once in a while to keep myself awake, but however, if you have a 4-part polyphony at some point that's just like really reverent, I think that's super important. Kind of because kind of like movies, like music with movies, it brings you in deep. It should be bringing you in deeper to the spiritual. Right. And if it distracts you in any way, then it's like that's not. Because I think
that would be my criticism, and I assume a lot of more traditional Catholics, like kind of their criticism of more charismatic celebrations of the Mass, or particularly the Novus Ordo, is that while that music might be good around a bonfire, and I don't have a problem getting into it and clapping and jumping around and getting goofy, then Mass is not the right context, and it's distracting. Like it is just distracting, and even if I said I love that hymn, but it's not for here, like. It's just not. And there's certain types of music that I think people enjoy, and they think it's okay to have at Mass because they enjoy it.
Right.
But it's like, well, I enjoy like some classic rock, but I don't want that at Mass. Yeah. But it's not because of the rock. It's just because the Mass is more important, and that's not bringing me into the Mass. Whereas, actually, it's funny you mentioned, is it Fauré? Is that how you say it? Fauré's Requiem. So they had that at St. John's, and I think they actually ended up doing it twice, because they did it once for All Souls Day, and then I think they did it again at a funeral or something, and I served both of them. And I remember, and I don't know if it was an old Mass, but I remember being like, this is absolutely what Mass should be like, because I feel like I'm participating in Mass more, and it's beautiful, but I'm not just listening to the music, and I'm not trying to focus on Mass and ignoring the music. It's really uplifting the Mass in this beautiful way. And I think polyphony is a really good example of that. Like, I don't think anyone listens to polyphony at Mass and is like, I wish Mass wasn't happening. I'm trying to hear what they're saying, or the reverse. It's like, no, like, it's giving me the ability to pray, or at least just listen to that and try to, like, contemplate, even if I'm not actively praying the rosary. Like, it is bringing my mind higher, and I find that those Masses, I'm very, very rarely distracted. Yeah. Even if it's a full hour, hour and a half, I'm not thinking about what I'm doing next. It's like, I'm there, I'm in this moment, kind of that linear progression of music like you're talking about. Whereas if you go to a charismatic, more kind of edgy Mass, that type of music, it's so distracting. And maybe it's just because I'm not used to it, but I think most people would say they're just focused on the music. They're focused, and the choir's up front,
or
and there's all of these different things. It's very emotional. The choir's up front. They're trying to almost take the attention away from the altar, and then the tabernacle's not there. Whereas you have a choir that's behind you, and you have this awesome piece that's just really emotional and moving. Yeah. It adds a lot to the Mass, and that doesn't. But it doesn't take away from the Mass. Yeah. It's not like if the music wasn't there, the Mass would be lesser. But if it allows you to enter into the Mass better, to me that seems like a positive thing. Yeah. It's something you should encourage, and like add funding so we can get a better choir, or go to the church that has that, so that you have that experience, and so you don't have the boring, where is my participation in this Mass experience? Right.
I feel like any music that takes God and pulls him down to earth is not good for Mass. I feel like what it should be doing is you feeling like you're being drawn up to heaven.
Right. I remember saying this on the podcast at least once, if not more than once. But I think Dr. Taylor Marshall, who I have my own problems with, but he does have some good content. He said that when you're thinking about the type of music you should have at Mass, you should think about whether it's appropriate if that instrument or that music was played at Calvary, because that's what's happening. So if it's some kind of gospel revival music, would that be appropriate if you just got your guitar and started belting that tune and Christ is dying next to you? No. Yeah. But the Miserere Mei by Allegri, totally. Like that's what that song is written for, that's absolutely what you should be singing. So, I think that's an interesting thing to reflect on. Yeah. Just what should be at Mass. And even if it's not something you grew up with, really think about what is Mass, what's actually happening, what's the mystery that's happening here, and then how can we enter into that deeply and cultivate an entire culture or an entire parish of this is how we want to worship, this is how we enter into the Mass more deeply. And I think a way to do that is to not only have it at Mass, because otherwise your only exposure to that type of music is at Mass. You have to have exposure to that outside of Mass, so that you can actually appreciate it when it does happen at Mass.
Right, and I like kind of to come all the way back around is that classical music, music that turns in on itself, and sometimes that music that we sing at, especially if it's very repetitive, like this music that they have in Steubenville, it's an emotional, and it's coming back to you. Yeah. Whereas something like the Miserere Mei, it's like drawing you outside of you. And that's what classical music does. Classical music, very rarely are you self-indulgent. Yeah. It's pop music. You're self-indulgent, and you're caught up in that emotion of like, oh, I love him, or I did love him, or why are we not still together? Whatever it is, you're stuck in this like in this place. And that's a lot of time what this Christian music is. It's reflecting back. It's like, no, you're supposed to be giving outwards. So they're listening to classical music. They're learning how to encounter the arts. Classical music, you're learning how to be drawn out of yourself, and then I think people will be able to appreciate it in the Mass because they already know how to allow themselves to be drawn out of it. Yeah. So they have to be taught.
Yeah. Let's go.
All right.
All right. So.
Any closing thoughts?
You all should listen to classical music.
So
forever
now. For anyone who's listening to this, can you give us like 5, just because I'm dull and I need like concrete songs to listen to? Is there like a playlist that I can post, or like a list of people where it's like, this isn't the ultimate like thing you need to be listening to, but this is a good place to start? Like, what are some composers or some songs or a playlist or something that people can listen to, and we could say this is a good starting point for classical music, like a good building block? Okay,
well, let's say Baroque era. I would say either the cello Bach suites are great, or say violin partitas. The organ, the well-tempered clavier, you could do that, say with piano, well-tempered clavier. The organ stuff, it's just really heavy. I think with Baroque, you come back to it later. Like once you get older, that's like the filet mignon after you've eaten like your whatever fish sticks and French fries, and then gone up to chicken nuggets, and then slowly made your way up. Then the classical music would be Mozart,
Okay.
but you could also like Haydn is great. Romantic. Oh man, that's really hard because gosh, there's so many beautiful ones. But say Beethoven, definitely Beethoven. He kind of straddles classical and romantic. But say even if you listen to like, it depends. You could type in Slavonic or Slavic composers, and you get Dvorak and Smetana and Tchaikovsky, people like that. But Brahms is great. Schumann is great. And I say just to pick one out of the Slavic, I would say Dvorak. Dvorak, Dvorak. That's the Romantic era. You can get post-romantic. It's a little bit tricky unless some of you guys like maybe hard rock or acid rock. You can look into Stravinsky and maybe Tchaikovsky. Stravinsky. I actually really enjoy Stravinsky, but that's again also a little bit more. You have to understand theory. But yeah, those are just good. Put in a playlist of like say Schumann. See what Spotify or whatever. What's the other one? iTunes or
Apple Music.
Apple Music,
just begins
Amazon
to like
Music,
Start
all
with
places were available, by the way.
that. Exactly.
Spotify,
Exactly. Very
Apple.
conveniently. And then come to my events that I give with the Green Mantle Arts and Lecture Series.
I do have a question real quick. I don't know how long it might take.
Mark, really? I was just wrapping it up in this
Sorry.
beautiful
No.
way. Just kidding. Go for it.
Excuse my ignorance, but whenever I think of classical music or Baroque or Romantic, I think of like that music isn't actively being produced anymore. Is it like obviously you can take elements from it, but like is it postmodern? Like what era are we in technically right now?
I don't know. I don't know what we are in now, modern, but a lot of
The common era. Right?
yeah, exactly. CE.
Gosh.
A lot of
Loves me so much.
a lot of. Do you guys say for AD? I always say after death. Do you guys say
After
that?
death.
That's what I thought.
That's what I
it's
thought.
Anno
Anno
Domini.
Domini.
Yeah,
Anno
yeah.
Domini or
Yeah.
Dominum Domini.
And your
Domini
Lord.
something. Okay, yeah.
Your
Just
overlord
recently
is technically, but
After death. I know that's not right, but it works for me.
as long as it's AD, the whole
Yeah.
BCE, it's just
I know.
such
So
garbage.
frustrating. I'm like, excuse me, I'm not 19. What? I'm just.
Well, the big thing
AD.
is what
I
started.
see.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
big
yeah,
question is what started the common era.
Yeah, exactly.
The census? Like no, what are you talking about?
So, going back to your, no, they do a lot. Symphonies are trying to really push, like on every one of their programs, they will have a modern because they're trying to get people to like it. But you always have. But the thing is that a lot of people that play in the symphony, what they say is after 5 years, you begin to recycle the same stuff. So they're playing the same Beethoven, the same Schumann, the same Brahms, and like over and over and over again. So you do still have people of the classical but there's like thousands of other composers in that era that are really great to listen to. But someone like that, you would have to go to Spotify.
Yeah.
But okay, then I guess like right now you have a composer. Like, what is he creating?
Yeah, I don't know what they would just call it contemporary.
Okay.
And it could be completely atonal, or it could be melodic, or it could be like, I think it's just now like taking different forms of different, just depending how
There's an artist that I've grown to listen to, and I think they started first with very digitalized because it's cheaper and you didn't have to hire an orchestra to play what you composed. And now it's like they're very big, they're very large, and they're taking lots of elements that are very classical, but they're also taking contemporary elements as well. So, and it's all like now they're hiring.
Which one is that?
Two Steps from Hell.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard of them,
No.
but they are very very orchestral now, and there's just like a lot of. It's the reason why I bring it up is because there isn't something that they're referencing like a movie or something like that. So it's like they're making music for music's sake.
Yeah.
And it's just, I wondered what kind of like, they're
Yeah.
making it now in this current age. I'm wondering like what kind of, is it classical?
Yeah.
Is it like, I don't.
Well, it depends, because now it's just a huge mix of things. But the thing is, the reason why we have theory is because we looked back at music and then ascribed theory to it. So I think it's the same thing that's happening now. They're just creating, and we've kind of fallen into, there's a set of rules just because that's part of it, there's a pattern to it.
Right.
So people who compose now, if it's melodic, they're going to be following to a degree a certain type of structure.
Okay.
So it'll be like in the whatever tradition, this new contemporary piece is called.
Yeah,
But-
but you wouldn't even say it's you would just say it's contemporary. And if
Okay.
they and you wouldn't even break it down and be like, oh well, they have classical elements and they have that. You're just kind of like you're
It's
just
new.
taking it as
Interesting.
contemporary.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It seems like that's true in dance as well, where it's like there's a lot of classic ballets or tap routines or operas, musicals. Like a lot of that is all, there's categories. But then now it's all contemporary, where it's like, well, it might be almost exactly like this really classical piece and you just changed a few things. But because it's right now,
Yeah.
we can't really ascribe it to anything. 50 years from now, we can say, oh,
Right.
it's this postmodern piece, or it's this whatever it is.
Yeah.
But right now, it's just kind of like,
Right.
regardless of what, the only way you can analyze it is by saying it's similar to
Right.
these things. But since it's a new thing, it almost needs time to like
Yeah.
ruminate and then become something,
And then they'll give
or to
it
see if other
a name.
people copy it, or if it just kind of dies away and no one remembers it.
Right. Then you'll call it like neoclassical or whatever.
It's funny that you brought that up, because I was thinking of bringing this up, but I'll just do it anyway. What are your thoughts, and maybe other people who you know that are like classically minded, like thoughts on groups like the Piano Guys, who they take a lot of really classical songs or
Yeah.
like really old songs, but then mostly, for the most part,
With
make
the
them
cello.
really, yeah, with and it's specifically
I know.
it's with the cello, but
It's
some.
despicable what they've done to the instruments.
Well, because I could see two sides of the aisle where you're like,
Yeah.
they took this awesome song that was beautiful, and then they added drums, and then they have this helicopter shot
Yeah.
of them flying over this
Super
desert,
jealous.
and it's just like,
Super jealous.
I can see how that would be really frustrating if you're like, no,
Yeah.
you're ruining the song. But if it's something that you're like, yes, maybe that's true, but also they have such a big reach
Yeah.
that people are like, what's Pachelbel's, canon? And
Yeah.
like, they don't even know what the original song is. And so
Right.
then they look into it because they grew up listening to the Piano Guys version of it.
Yeah.
But then they're like, oh, there actually is the original. That's cool. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
you run,
And then
you
they're
kind
like,
of-
I like the Panda Guys
I've done
better.
the Piano Guys
Their
version
version.
better. But it is interesting how many,
Yeah.
like, I guess I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Like, is that, do you view that as like ruining classical music, or do you just see that as like kind of a, whatever, contemporary twist on these classic pieces, and it's
Yeah.
fun, and they're likable, and they do like fun music videos, and so it's maybe not the
Yeah.
ideal way to do it, but it is a way of getting this music out to people, but also
Right.
kind of catering to what kind of modern people like.
Yeah. So I would kind of equate it to when you need to get your kid to eat meat and you put ketchup on it.
Okay.
Yeah. Like a filet mignon.
That's all you
And then
need
you
to
put
know.
ketchup on it. What's that?
That's all you need to know.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
Piano Guys equal ketchup. You'll
Yeah.
the hashtag will catch on.
And
That's the name
finally,
of the episode.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Done.
No. Oh, wait. No, wait.
Nope, that's all there is. Let's stop the recording.
No, that eventually, hopefully, they'll stop using ketchup but
Yeah.
they're making it accessible to people, and people are
Yeah.
actually beginning to listen to classical music, and it is a spin on things, and it is kind of fun, but at the same time, you're just like, they probably wouldn't be listening to otherwise. It's cool that they're being creative,
Yeah.
but hopefully that's not where it's going to stop.
Yeah. Because I think I would say, and there's a few, I think there's another group called Two Cellos or something like that. And no, so I understand why you would hate them. But the interesting thing about them, I think, and maybe this is like, maybe this is the non-musician in me speaking, but it's interesting because I think I listened to one of their songs, which was like a classical cover of Eye of the Tiger.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like, okay, that's a little weird, but it was interesting because it wasn't taking a song that was classical and then saying, okay,
Right.
we're going to add this like kick drum and it's going to be
Yeah.
awesome. And like, there's going to be this whole beat from other songs like the
Yeah.
Batman, they're like weaving all of these like different melodies together and adding
Yeah.
a beat. And that's fun and that's cool and people like it. but they were taking a song that was a rock song, and then they're keeping the same beat, but it's all cello.
Yeah.
Which I thought was kind of an interesting twist, because they're almost making modern music that people know, and they're like, okay,
Yes.
but listen to it in a cello
Yes.
form, which I thought, and it's different from the piano guys, although they do that with some of their songs,
Right.
Because a lot of their songs are blends of things, or they've got two
Yeah.
different melodies going on, but with two cellos, it's like, okay, here's a Beatles song, hear it in cello. And
No,
you're like,
it is
oh,
neat.
That's interesting.
No, what they're
you know?
doing, it is really neat. It's just, and some of the stuff that they're doing is complicated, but it's also, because it's rock, it's incredibly repetitive, and it's mostly rhythmic, and they found a niche, and they like worked it really well.
Yeah.
And I'm just upset
You missed
that I
your
didn't
calling.
find it first. I
One
just couldn't
cello.
fit into
Just
those pair of leather
one
pants.
cello.
Yeah, one cello. I don't need other cellos.
Just take the covers of their songs and then just do the original song. Be like,
Yeah,
it's a way
exactly.
better version.
Or I'm gonna do the acoustic, like Janis Joplin version of it.
Cello girl.
Yeah, the cello girl. Yeah. Well, I always had this image in my head. I was like, oh, because that's the thing is in Los Angeles, it was so frustrating because these girls would like be the sexy version of whatever. Like there would be a quartet, and they were like the Bond women. And I was just kind of like, why do we need to dress like that? I'm pretty good at cello. I don't need to dress that way to like get sold. And so I just had this. I really want, right when the two cellos came out. My cousin is like, I don't know, she works in Hollywood, so she's like, Larissa, you need to get another cellist. You need to do like a girl version of it, and I'll help you. I'll get a video and stuff like that for you. But really, what I wanted to do is I wanted to be wearing, like, out in this field, wearing this beautiful, long, flowy, like, feminine dress, and just shred my cello, play something that is actually really hard, and then, like, walk away and just, like, drop the cello and just walk away into the fields, like, you know, of just of having it be like just like I'm really good at my instrument, and I don't need to, you know. So that's the thing, is that the two cellos, it is really cool and it's fun, and I actually almost like more than piano guys because they are taking rock tunes, but at the same time, it's not super complicated music. They are very good cellists. The reason why they're doing it is because they're very talented,
Right.
and they can play like the concertos and everything else, but they're, you know,
Yeah.
mostly known for that.
Right.
So
Okay. Well, when your podcast starts and it's one of those names, we'll know whether it's podcast or Piano Guys Equals Ketchup.
yeah, or two
Piano-
cellos stink. Two cellos are not even American.
If you
Are you
I
American?
know you had mentioned when Brian and I talked to you at the Celtic Christmas tour thing you did
yeah.
with Ben David and Nolan Ladusky.
Ladusky,
Is that
yeah,
right? Okay.
yeah.
I always want to say, we talked about this. I was like, I think his Instagram handle is LaFlutesky.
Oh, yeah,
Because
yeah.
he plays the flute. And so I always am like tempted to say that. I'm like, that can't be his name. But when we talked to you, that you had talked about maybe doing a podcast. Would that be something that you would just take a musical piece and like the first part of the podcast would be the piece and then you would comment on it? Or would that be something that you would want to keep it like purely conversational because music would be better live, but it would be more like a history of this composer or this particular piece, and then like here's a link and you can listen to it, but I don't want to play it.
Well, I was initially wanting to do a podcast with a friend of mine who is super interesting. Like and I think I told you guys how she was my pianist, and we would get in the car to go to a gig, and we would every time get lost, like wrong turn or whatever.
Yeah.
And so our podcast would only last as long as the car trip to where we got lost. We'd be like, oh, we have to stop here because we got lost. But it was just always so fascinating. Like we would just talk about like, are you okay with wearing black for concerts? And I'm like, no, I just don't like the idea of wearing all black. She's like, but, so we'd have these really interesting, like where it would be interesting for musicians, but also for non-musicians to be like, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, we were talking about like practicing tips, or how do you like kids, or what was it like growing up? Like, what was your experience? What was my experience? And so just having a two-way conversation where people actually get a peek into the window of what it's like to be a musician, or whatever, just like, this is so frustrating. I'm stuck on this one. Like, how do you do vibrato? Or like, I don't know. This is what and it's like,
Yeah,
and again,
things
part
most
of
people
it,
wouldn't even know about.
yeah. And part of it, because people hire you for something and you feel guilty asking for a certain amount of money, and they don't want to pay you for that much money, but you're like, wait, hold on a second. Like, I put in a lot of hours for this, and this is what it takes. Like, I always wanted to videotape myself when I was writing my master's of just hitting record when I woke up. I was in one studio room of like rolling out of bed, hitting the like coffee machine, practicing until the coffee was ready, pouring myself a coffee, sitting down, practicing for a couple of hours, then looking at the music, recordings, other people recording, looking at the score, practicing some more, and you're like, okay, it's been 5 hours. I'm gonna go like shower now to get like, and then you practice a little bit, you know, like you don't realize what a musician's life is like. And you kind of just like, oh, would you like to come and play for my wedding? You're like, well, I guess. I mean, are you paying for this? Or is this like more of a gift? Like
We're
you're
friends.
doing me a gift by give me an opportunity to play out in public. You know? So, yeah, it's just like, that would have been awesome, but I need another person.
Yeah.
But I could have my other person comment on it, my other half.
There you go.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
Schumann, who was schizophrenic, and so when he wrote in his newspaper, Florian and this what was his name, Florius and something else, they would have, depending on which one he would comment differently. One was like passionate, and the other one was like a lot more whatever, like in melancholic, and the
I
other one was
wasn't
more
sure
fiery.
exactly where you were going. I was
Yeah.
like, wait.
I think.
And then you said that, so now I'm on the same level.
Okay, you're
right
sure.
now.
Yeah. So my other schizophrenic side. Just have a yeah.
All right. Well, on schizophrenia,
Yeah.
Before we
ending on
get into that-
2 in 1 cello.
yeah. Let's go ahead and end. Larissa, thanks for coming on. And we look forward to your new website and all your future endeavors. And if you start a podcast, we'll have you back on and you can advertise that.
Awesome.
Or if you don't, we'll just repost your website so people can check that out and, get classical.
Yeah.
So
Let's do it.
cool.
go.
This is Doing Virtue,
Catholic podcast.
where virtue
is what we